I was still getting used to the night shift. 3 weeks in, and every hour still felt longer than the last. Every shadow on the road sharper, darker, like it was waiting for me. Route 9 was one of those roads that made you question why anyone even lived nearby. The asphalt stretched endlessly, broken only by the occasional flickering streetlight or the dull white lines slicing the blackness. I'd been driving for hours, mostly listening to the hum of the engine, letting the low radio chatter fill the emptiness. But tonight, the silence between calls was heavier than usual. It was just past midnight when I first saw her. I was rounding a long curve where the trees on either side pressed close to the asphalt, branches clawing at the sky, and there she was, standing on the shoulder. A girl, or maybe a woman. She had long dark hair, damp from the fog, and a coat that looked too thin for this late in October. She raised her thumb without a word. At first, I thought about ignoring her, but there was something off about her stance. Not panicked, not cold, not scared, just waiting. I slowed the car and pulled over. My heart started hammering for no clear reason. Training said not to pick up hitchhikers ever, but the road was empty for miles and she wasn't making any noise. Her eyes, I can't explain it. They weren't angry, weren't sad, weren't even pleading. They were just there, watching. Need a ride? I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice probably came out shakier than I thought. She nodded once. She didn't say a word, just got into the back seat. I remember looking in the rearview mirror and catching her face in the dim light of the dashboard. No bag, no phone, nothing, just her. The ride started in silence. I didn't want to make conversation, mostly because I felt a weight pressing down in my chest, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. The fog hung low over the road, and the trees on either side seemed to bend closer with every mile. The headlights barely pierced the haze. I thought I could hear faint footsteps on the pavement behind the car, but whenever I glanced in the mirrors, there was nothing. I tried again. Where are you headed? My words sounded absurd in the quiet, like I was speaking to myself. She tilted her head slightly, almost like she was thinking, then shook it. Didn't answer. I nodded, though I had no idea what I was agreeing to. The silence stretched. Every mile marker that passed felt like it took 10 minutes. I started noticing little things. The air inside the car felt colder. My breath fogged in the rearview mirror even though the heat was on. Her hair, it seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. And sometimes, just for a split second, the edges of her face seemed to blur, like she wasn't fully there. I told myself it was just exhaustion, maybe the fog playing tricks. But the instinct in the pit of my stomach wouldn't let me lie to myself. Something was wrong. Something about her wasn't natural. Do you want some water? I finally asked, trying to break the tension. My voice sounded hollow, echoing against the roof of the car. She just nodded again, and I handed her the small bottle from the console. When she drank, her hands were cold, colder than ice, but the bottle didn't feel cold when I touched it after. That's when the dread really started to coil in my chest. It was the kind of moment you remember because it doesn't make sense. And yet, it happens. The road twisted ahead, a series of sharp turns through the trees. That's when I noticed something moving in the fog. At first, I thought it was another car, headlights dim and scattered. But there was nothing there. No sound of a vehicle, no engine, no reflection in the mirrors. And then I realized the figure was walking along the side of the road, keeping pace with us, though the road was winding, impossible to match that speed. I glanced back at her in the rearview mirror. She was smiling just a little, and it wasn't friendly. It was knowing. And the figure outside stopped when she did. "Do you see that?" I whispered. Though I already knew she could hear me, she nodded again. That simple nod felt heavier than any words she could have said. The air in the car seemed to tighten, as if the fog itself was pressing down on me. I swallowed hard, trying not to panic. This is my first solo shift on a long, lonely road, I thought. I'm tired. I'm imagining things. But I wasn't imagining it. The figure started moving again, slowly, deliberately, stepping through the mist, always at the same distance from the car, always keeping pace. I felt my hands trembling on the wheel. I considered stopping, turning around, pulling off into a side road and calling it in. But something in me, a mix of fear and fascination, kept me driving forward. "Do you want me to stop?" I asked, my voice cracking. She shook her head for the first time, her hair brushing her shoulders. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it felt deliberate, like a warning. The road straightened, and for a moment, the figure disappeared into the fog. Relief washed over me, though it was shallow. My pulse still rattled in my ears. I tried to focus on the hum of the tires, the lines on the road, anything that grounded me in reality. But every time I glanced at the back seat, her face seemed to flicker, like a light bulb struggling to stay on. Then just as suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding, chest tight, spinning around in my seat. Empty. The back seat was empty. No coat, no hair, no hint that anyone had been there at all. My own reflection stared back at me in the rearview mirror, pale and sweating. I called it in. "Dispatch, I don't know what happened. Someone was in my car and now..." My words trailed off. The dispatcher asked me to describe her, but when I tried, I realized I couldn't remember her face. Not clearly. Just the hair, the coat, the feeling. The dread. The knowing. I drove the rest of the route in silence, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. Every shadow at the side of the road made me flinch. Every rustle of the trees sounded like footsteps following me, even though I kept glancing into the mirrors and seeing nothing. By the time I reached the next town, the fog had lifted and the world felt ordinary again. Streetlights glared down on quiet houses, cars parked along curbs, nothing out of place. And yet the memory of her, or him, or whatever that was, lingered in my mind. Heavy, suffocating, like the fog itself had gotten under my skin. I never saw her again. Or at least, I hope I didn't. But sometimes, when I'm driving those long stretches alone, headlights cutting through mist and trees leaning too close, I swear I can feel her presence behind me. Just a faint weight in the seat, a cold draft brushing my neck. And sometimes, when I glance in the mirror, I think I see a shadow flicker, just for a second. That night changed something in me. Not the fear, not exactly, but the knowledge that some things don't belong in the world, that there are moments when reality bends and you can't explain it. And worse, that sometimes you're the only one who sees it. I try to tell myself it was fatigue, that it was my imagination, but the memory doesn't lie. And every time I drive Route 9, I feel it again. Waiting. Watching. And I remember the hitchhiker who wasn't really there, whose eyes saw something in me I can't unsee. I don't know why she chose me. I don't know why she disappeared. And I don't know if I want to know. All I know is that I'll never drive that road the same way again. I couldn't stop thinking about her, even as I gripped the wheel, trying to tell myself I'd imagined everything. But that's the thing about moments like that. They cling to you. The way her eyes seemed to pierce straight through the fog. The way her presence pressed against the inside of the car, heavy and silent. When I first slowed to pick her up, I told myself it was a routine gesture. I picked up hitchhikers as a rookie mistake, yes, but not as a rule. And yet when she got in, there was no hesitation. No bag, no voice, just that quiet weight in the back seat. The engine hummed under me as I drove, the tires whispering over the asphalt. The fog hadn't lifted yet, and the trees pressed in close on either side, their black shadows flicking past like dark arms reaching. I wanted to ask her where she was going, wanted to break the silence, but something stopped me. Not fear exactly, more like respect for the space she occupied. The space between worlds, maybe. I didn't know what else to call it. Finally, I said, You don't have a destination? Or somewhere you need to get to?" My voice sounded thin, almost like it belonged to someone else. She tilted her head slowly, her hair brushing her shoulder, and smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not polite. Something knowing. Something that felt older than the world itself. I shivered. "I don't think you're supposed to ask questions," I said, more to myself than to her. The fog outside thickened, swallowing the headlights, and I caught myself glancing at the mirrors. The road behind us seemed empty, impossibly quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your own breathing sound loud and clumsy. She didn't move, didn't say anything, just let the silence stretch. And somehow, that silence became oppressive, like the car had shrunk around me, pressing tighter with every mile. Why are you out here alone? I asked finally, trying to sound casual. My stomach churned as soon as the words left my mouth. I didn't want answers. I think I already knew I wouldn't like them, she laughed. A small, soft sound, but not a sound that reached her eyes. It was the kind of laugh that makes you question whether it was real or just a memory of something you've forgotten you should have remembered. You think this is alone? She said quietly. Her voice was smooth, almost too calm, like it belonged to someone who knew the world in a way I didn't. You think anyone is ever really alone? I swallowed. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, though the heater was still running, warm enough to keep the frost off the windshield. I don't understand, I admitted, even though I knew it was true. I didn't understand. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. That's when I first noticed it. Little things, subtle, almost imperceptible. Shadows twisting behind her in the corner of my vision. The seatbelt strap shifting on its own. A faint mist curling around her hands, clinging to the leather seat. I blinked, trying to convince myself I was tired, that it was the fog, the road, the long shift pressing on my brain. The road turned sharply to the left, the fog swallowing the curve before I even got there. I braked a little, and when I glanced back at her, she was leaning forward, staring straight at me. Her face had changed. Not drastically, but enough that I froze. Her eyes seemed deeper, darker, like pools of something I wasn't meant to see. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. The same face, the same hair, the same coat, like nothing had shifted at all. "Are you okay?" I asked, voice tight, gripping the wheel harder. She smiled again. That same knowing smile. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice had that echo to it, like it bounced off some empty place just beyond the fog, a place I couldn't reach. We drove in silence again. Every sound seemed louder. The engine, the tires, my breathing, the fog pressing against the windshield. And then she spoke again. "Do you ever wonder if people just vanish?" she asked softly. Her words were so casual it almost made me laugh. Almost. I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" I asked, though a part of me already knew. "You know," she said, "people, they disappear. Not just physically, but from memory, from everything that remembers them, from the world. Sometimes you see them, but they're not there. Not really." I shook my head. I don't think that's possible." My voice cracked. The heater clicked, but it didn't warm the icy knot in my stomach. Her smile didn't fade. "Maybe you just haven't seen it yet." That was when I noticed it. The road behind us, the asphalt, the lines, the fog, it wasn't moving. Or maybe it was moving too slowly. Time felt wrong. My chest tightened. I could feel my pulse in my ears. My hands shook on the wheel. I glanced at her again. She wasn't leaning forward anymore. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't anywhere. The back seat was empty. I slammed the brakes, the tires skidding just enough to make the car groan, the engine whining. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst. I spun around, eyes scanning the seat, the floor, the small space where she had been. Nothing. The coat, the hair, the faint mist, gone. I fumbled with the radio. "Dispatch. I think I need assistance. Someone was in my car, and now they're gone." My words tumbled over themselves. There was static. Then the calm, professional voice of dispatch. "Can you clarify, officer? Who's missing?" I don't know. "I picked someone up. Female, dark hair, coat. She's gone." My hands shook and I gripped the wheel for dear life, trying to focus on the road. The fog hadn't lifted. If anything, it had thickened, curling in from the sides like fingers. Dispatch paused. "Are you sure, officer? Did they leave the vehicle?" "Yes, I saw them. I gave them a ride, and now, nothing. She vanished." My voice was rising, panic bubbling under the surface. There was a long silence on the radio. "Please proceed to the next checkpoint. We'll have a unit meet you there." I obeyed, driving in a trance, scanning every shadow along the road, every line of fog, every branch twisting against the dim light. My mind spun, trying to rationalize. Exhaustion, stress, sleep deprivation, anything. But every instinct in my body screamed at me that this wasn't exhaustion. This wasn't imagination. This was something else. Something wrong. Something not meant to be. By the time I reached the checkpoint, the sun was just beginning to brush the horizon, but the fog stayed, thick and unyielding. The other officer on duty glanced at me, eyebrows raised. "Rough night?" "You have no idea," I muttered, gripping the wheel and refusing to look back. I tried to describe her, to give some account of what I'd seen, but the words felt inadequate. How do you describe someone who disappears mid-motion? Who isn't really there but leaves a weight in your chest, a cold press against the air, a memory that doesn't belong anywhere in the world? I stumbled over the details, hair dark, coat thin, eyes that seemed to hold more than they should. Every word felt wrong. They listened politely, nodded, asked the standard questions, then filed the report. And that was it. No trace. No explanation. No sign she had ever existed except in my memory. And even that felt unreliable. I kept turning it over in my mind, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing, but the memory pressed too strongly, too real, too heavy. I left the checkpoint hours later, still feeling the space where she had been. The seatbelt clicked against the empty leather. The heater hissed at me, and the fog lay thick over the road. And in that emptiness, I felt it. A presence, just at the edge of perception. Watching, waiting. Maybe she wasn't gone at all. Maybe she was always there, in the corners of the night, in the spaces you don't look, in the gaps between what's real and what isn't. I drive Route 9 differently now, slowly, carefully, always watching the mirrors, always listening to the air, because sometimes in the corner of my vision I see her, just a shadow, just a flicker. And I remember that night, the night she got in my car, the night I drove and didn't notice the world bending, and the night she vanished. And I know if I'm not careful, she could appear again. After that night on Route 9, I thought things would settle down. I told myself I was imagining her, or maybe it was a trick of fatigue and fog. I tried to bury it, focus on the work, but some things don't let you do that. Some things stay with you. It started with the local reports. People disappearing along the outskirts of town, mostly late at night. Kids walking home from friends' houses. A woman jogging along the highway. A man who never made it back from his late-night shift at the mill. The patterns were faint, scattered, but enough to catch my attention. Enough to make the hair on my arms rise every time I drove the long roads after dark. I began logging the incidents, trying to connect them, though I knew in my gut I might not find anything. I became obsessed with the fog, the thick, clinging mist that seemed to roll in without warning. Every time it settled over the town, I felt like it carried her. Like the air itself remembered, I started seeing her again. Or maybe I should say, something like her. At first it was just a flash, a dark shape on the edge of the headlights, disappearing when I turned my head. But soon it became more deliberate. I would pass a side street and there she'd be, standing there watching me. Always at the edge of perception, just beyond the detail my eyes could catch. And when I looked back a second later, nothing. Nothing but fog and the skeletal branches of the trees. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence or paranoia. I'm a patrol officer. I spend nights alone on long stretches of empty roads. Your mind plays tricks. But it wasn't just the seeing, it was the feeling. That same cold press of presence in the car, the weight in the empty air, the sense that she was aware of me. Always. Watching. Waiting. One night I stayed late after my shift officially ended. I had reports to file, patrols to finish. Route 9 again. The fog was thick, rolling over the pavement in a blanket so white it seemed to swallow the lines. And then I saw her, standing by the side of the road just as before. Dark hair, coat thin and damp, and eyes that seemed impossibly deep. I slowed, my pulse spiking, and she didn't move, didn't beckon, didn't do anything except exist there like she belonged to the fog more than the earth. I drove past slowly, my headlights casting long, weak shadows. When I glanced in the rearview mirror, she was gone. My chest tightened, the cold settling into my bones, not just from the night air, but from that same strange, unshakable dread I had felt before. I began seeing her on other patrols, too. Not always on Route 9, sometimes near the old mill, sometimes along the empty railroad tracks. She never moved. She just watched. And sometimes, when I passed too quickly, I'd catch a flicker of something else, an impossible bend in the shape of her body, or a shadow that stretched longer than it should. Twisting in ways that made my stomach lurch, it started affecting my sleep. I would see her in my dreams standing at the edge of foggy roads, just watching. Sometimes I would wake up and swear I could hear the faint scrape of her shoes on pavement, even though the streets were empty. My apartment felt wrong. Shadows lingered in corners longer than they should, and the fog seemed to press against the windows at night, thick and suffocating. I tried talking to a colleague about it. Tom, veteran officer, a man who had seen everything the town could throw at him. I expected him to roll his eyes, dismiss me as a rookie losing it, but he just frowned and leaned back in his chair. "Route 9? He said slowly. "You've seen her too?" I blinked. "How, what?" "You're not imagining it," he said. "I've seen her. Years ago. People used to call her the Mist Woman, always near disappearances. Nobody ever got close. Nobody ever spoke. I don't know. She's just there." I didn't sleep that night, or the next. I drove the roads, patrolling in circles, trying to catch a glimpse. Always there, always just at the edge of perception. And every time I drove past, I felt the same weight in the car, the same cold brush of presence. One night, I followed her, not intentionally at first. I rounded a bend and she was there again, standing silently by the foggy shoulder. I slowed. My mind screamed at me to stop, to turn, to go back. But my curiosity, my need to understand, it wouldn't let me. I kept driving slowly, careful not to startle her, and then she moved. Or I thought she did. For a moment, it looked like she was keeping pace with me. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and she wasn't there. I turned to look out the passenger window, and she was on the side of the road again, perfectly still. I didn't blink, I didn't breathe. I drove past, heart hammering, sweat soaking the collar of my uniform. It became an obsession. The town's reports didn't matter anymore. The fog, the roads, the darkness, that was my world now. And she existed in every corner of it. I would see her shape in the mist before a call came in. I would see her shadow before any report of a missing person reached the station. I began to wonder if she was connected. If the fog, the disappearances, the weight in the air, they were all part of her, and she was part of something I couldn't comprehend. I tried documenting it. Notes in a small notebook I carried in my coat pocket. Sketches of the shape I thought I saw. Times, locations, patrol routes. But the more I wrote, the more it seemed she slipped away from me. She wasn't something I could capture. She wasn't a person. She was something else. Something that existed on the edges of roads and fog and memory. One night, I was parked on a side road near the mill, reviewing the notebook by the dashboard light. The fog rolled in thick, muffling sound and swallowing light. And then I saw her again, in the distance. Dark hair, thin coat, watching. I held my breath, counting silently, trying to steel myself. I wanted to call it in, wanted to radio dispatch, but my voice felt heavy, like the air itself was pressing it down. I watched her, frozen, and then she disappeared. Not just into the fog. Gone. The weight was lifted for a moment, and I felt relief. And then, after a heartbeat, I felt it again. The presence. Lighter this time, but unmistakable. Watching me from the shadows. Following me in ways that had nothing to do with distance. I don't know how long I sat there, notebook forgotten, staring into the fog. The town was silent. The trees pressed close. The road stretched endlessly, white lines flickering under the headlights. And in that silence, I understood something I didn't want to. She wasn't just near the disappearances. She was part of them. She wasn't just watching the roads. She was the roads, the fog, the spaces where people vanished and the world forgot. I drove home that night in silence. The fog cleared as I neared the town, but the weight didn't leave me. I checked the mirrors constantly, my pulse pounding, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly it hurt. Every shadow in my peripheral vision made me flinch. Every flicker of movement made my stomach drop. And yet part of me wanted to see her again. Wanted to understand what she was, even though my mind screamed that understanding was impossible. By the time I got home, the sun was rising, casting long, pale light across the streets. My apartment felt off. The fog clung to the windows, curling in, lingering even though it shouldn't have. I tried to sleep, but the memories wouldn't let me. The memory of her eyes, the shape of her coat in the fog, the impossible stillness of her presence, it pressed against my chest, tightening, relentless. I started taking notes obsessively, mapping the sightings, the fog, the disappearances. Every night I patrolled, I looked for her. Every morning I woke with the image of her in my mind, standing silently, waiting. I knew deep down that I would never stop. That even if I tried, even if I moved, even if I left the job, the road, the town, she would follow. And that realization was worse than anything else. That the fog woman, or whatever she was not bound by distance, time, or logic. That she existed where the world forgot, in the spaces people vanish, in the cold press of the night, always just beyond perception. I've learned to live with it mostly. To patrol carefully, to keep my eyes on the mirrors, to listen for the faintest whispers in the fog, to know that somewhere she's watching, waiting. And every time I see the mist roll in, I remember that night on Route 9, that first ride, and the knowledge settles in my chest like ice. Some things you cannot catch, some things you cannot escape, and some things will always be there, at the edge of your perception, watching you, waiting for the next moment you falter. I see her on almost every patrol now. Not always the same place, not always the same time, but always. Always watching, always waiting. And I know somewhere in the fog she remembers me too. It started small, just a feeling. A pressure in the air behind me. I had been on patrol for hours, alone on the fogged-out stretch of Route 9, and yet it felt like I wasn't really alone. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, telling myself it was my imagination. But the reflection didn't feel right. Sometimes the darkness in the back seat looked heavier than it should, as if it had weight, as if it breathed. I had almost convinced myself it was fatigue. The long hours, the endless monotony of asphalt and trees, until I felt it move. Not physically, not in the way a person moves, but a shift in the air. A ripple of cold that pressed against the back of my neck and shoulders. I turned slowly, trying to catch something in the faint glow of the dashboard light, but the seat was empty. The leather looked untouched, and yet I could feel her. The fog pressed in from outside, thick and sticky. Headlights from no cars barely pierced the whiteness. The trees leaned closer on either side of the road, black and skeletal, and the silence was absolute except for the hum of my engine and the beat of my own heart. Every mile marker that passed made the sense of being watched tighten in my chest. I remembered that first night, the hitchhiker, the way she had climbed into my car silently, the weight of her presence, the strange knowing in her eyes. I had thought it was a mistake, a one-off, but now I realized it wasn't. She, or whatever it was, had followed me, or maybe it had always been there, waiting. I reached for the radio, fingers trembling, wanting to call it in, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain this? Not just a person disappearing, not just strange sightings, but something that existed in the space where a person should be. Something that was there, and not there at all. I tried to focus on the road. The lines stretched out, pale against the asphalt, guiding me forward. But every glance to the back seat made my stomach twist. Shadows pooled there, darker than the night itself, and sometimes they shifted as if to follow me. I shook my head, forcing the image away, trying to reason it out. Cold air, fog, tired eyes. That's all it was. Nothing more, and yet the pressure kept building. A whisper of movement, a soft, almost inaudible brush against my shoulder. Sometimes I thought I felt hair brush against my cheek, though the seat was empty, the windows closed. My pulse raced. I gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white, trying to steady my breathing. I remembered Tom telling me about the mist woman, how she appeared on the edges of disappearances, on lonely roads, always watching, never touching, never speaking. I told myself it was superstition, the kind of thing officers repeat to explain the unexplainable. But I knew now, it wasn't superstition. I was living it. I tried to call dispatch again. My voice sounded shaky, even to myself. Dispatch, I think someone is in the back seat. My words faltered. Or something. Silence. Static. The faint hum of the engine. Nothing else. I glanced at the mirrors again. Empty. The seatbelt snapped lazily against the leather, but nothing else moved. My mind raced, pulling at memories, trying to anchor myself to logic. I'm alone. I'm tired. I'm imagining this. It's just the fog, the long shift, the empty roads. Nothing more. But then, for the first time, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Not pressing, not heavy, just resting lightly. A presence that made my skin crawl, my spine tighten, my chest feel too small. I froze, heart hammering, eyes wide. My breath caught in my throat. I told myself to turn around. I told myself to look. But my body wouldn't obey. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. And in that moment, I understood that this wasn't just a person. This wasn't something I could see or hear or touch. This was something that existed in the space I couldn't control. Something that lived in the back of the car, in the fog, in the silence. Something that could be anywhere, yet nowhere. I drove on, shaking, breath shallow. Every few minutes, I would glance at the mirrors. Shadows shifted. Dark shapes pooled in the corners of my eyes. And then, when I dared to blink, everything seemed to return to normal. Empty seat, empty road, the fog curling against the headlights. But the pressure remained, constant, lingering like a weight in the air, like someone had been sitting there all along. I stopped at a checkpoint for a break, telling myself it would help me think. But the moment I cut the engine, the silence in the car felt different, heavier. The fog pressed against the windshield, curling inside the cracks around the doors. I could feel it in the air, in the way the dashboard light flickered faintly, in the way my own breathing seemed to echo against the metal and leather. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to shake it off when I felt it again. The weight on the back seat, subtle at first, then growing, like someone leaning forward watching me. I didn't dare turn. I didn't dare breathe. The world outside the car seemed to stretch and distort. Shapes in the fog elongated unnaturally. Shadows twisted against the trees. And the feeling of being watched, was absolute. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but my phone was dead. My radio had been useless before. And I realized, in a quiet, creeping horror, that I was completely alone. Alone in the presence of something I could not name. Something I could not see, but something that was entirely there. The minutes stretched into hours. The fog remained, thick and unyielding, curling around the car, pressing against the windows. And then, as suddenly as it started, it was gone. The weight lifted. The pressure vanished. The seat was empty. The car was still. I blinked, unsure if I had imagined it, but my hands were shaking, my shirt damp with sweat. My pulse felt like it had settled, but my mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I couldn't. I still can't. I continued the patrol, moving slower than usual, glancing constantly at the mirrors. Every turn of the road, every curve in the asphalt, I expected it to return. I expected the weight, the presence, the knowing. And sometimes when the fog rolled in, I swear I feel it again, just at the edge of perception, waiting. By the time I returned to the station, I was exhausted. My shift had ended hours ago, but I felt trapped in the haze of what I had experienced. My uniform was damp with sweat. My hands shook. My mind raced with images of dark hair, thin coats, and eyes that seemed impossibly deep, impossibly aware. I tried to speak to a colleague, Tom, but words failed me. I couldn't describe it without sounding insane. How do you explain the sensation of being watched by something that isn't there? How do you explain the invisible weight in the backseat of your car, the cold press of air that isn't cold, the sense that the fog itself remembers? I filed the night report mechanically, fingers shaking over the keyboard. Everything seemed normal on paper. Nothing unusual, just another quiet patrol, long roads, thick fog. But I knew the truth. And the truth pressed against me, heavier than any paper or report could contain. That night, when I drove home, I kept glancing in the mirrors every few seconds, half expecting to see her there again, half expecting the weight to return. And I knew deep down that it wasn't over. It never would be over. The back seat was empty. But I knew better. She, or whatever it was still there, lurking, just out of reach, waiting, watching. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that one day, I might not notice when she finally decides to sit down beside me again. Until then, the back seat is never truly empty. Not for me. Not when the fog rolls in. Not when the night stretches long and quiet and the world seems still. Because I've felt it. I've felt her presence, and knowing that doesn't let you sleep. Knowing that doesn't let you breathe. Knowing that doesn't let you pretend the world is safe. Some nights I swear I can feel the air shift behind me, just a fraction. A subtle brush against my shoulder. And even when I look, nothing is there. But I know it is. And I know it always will be. It was just past 3 in the morning when the call came in. The kind of hour where the city feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio, calm but insistent, asking me to check an apartment building on the north side. Reports of a domestic disturbance, loud bangs, screaming. Then silence. I pulled onto the street, headlights cutting through the fog that had rolled in overnight. The buildings were old, gray, tired-looking, leaning over the narrow road like they were too heavy to stand. The street was empty except for a few parked cars, their windows dark and still. I parked near the entrance, radio in hand, and listened. At first, nothing. Just the faint hum of the heater, the hum of the city that still slept. I called dispatch. Unit on scene. Checking the building. My voice sounded hollow in the night. There was a pause, a faint crackle, then... Copy that. Proceed with caution. Standard protocol. I had learned to trust it, even when my stomach twisted and the hair on my neck stood up. The lobby smelled faintly of mildew and old carpet. The lights flickered, low and uneven, casting long shadows along the walls. I tapped my flashlight on, letting the beam cut through the gloom. I moved slowly, listening. Every creak of the stairs, every hiss of the radiator made me jump, made me question why I had volunteered for night patrol in the first place. The noise had stopped. That's why I was here. But the silence. The silence was worse. It felt heavy, like it pressed against my chest, like the air itself was watching. I reached apartment 3B. The door was slightly ajar, just enough that I could see inside. I drew my service weapon and pushed the door slowly. Nothing at first. Empty living room, couch cushions tossed aside. A chair overturned. The smell of alcohol or maybe cleaning fluid hung faintly in the air. Signs of struggle, but no people. I stepped inside carefully. Every floorboard groaned under my weight. The apartment was small, cramped. A lamp had been knocked over, its cord stretched across the floor. Curtains fluttered from the draft of the open window. And then I noticed it, the kitchen. A plate shattered on the tile, tiny shards catching the light. A streak of red across the counter. Not a lot, just enough to make the stomach knot, I called out. Police, is anyone here? Please respond! My voice sounded loud in the empty apartment. Nothing answered. Not a whisper, not a shuffle, not a breath. I moved toward the bedroom. The door was closed. I reached for the knob, hesitated, then opened it slowly. The room was empty. Bed unmade. Clothes scattered across the floor. A chair tipped over. Everything suggested chaos, panic, maybe a fight, but no people. And then my eyes caught something on the wall, a photograph, crooked, of a family, smiling, happy, innocent, and next to it, a smear of blood, faint but unmistakable. I swallowed. My hand trembled slightly on the flashlight. My pulse was racing, but I told myself to stay calm. Standard procedure. Check the apartment. Find the occupants. Secure the scene. But the apartment felt wrong. Too quiet. Too still. Like it had been waiting for me to arrive. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. Bedroom closets. Empty. The air felt colder now. Heavier. And the longer I stayed, the more I felt it. Something watching me. Not a person. Not a shadow from outside. Something in the corners, just at the edge of vision. I spun slowly, flashlight cutting the room into slices of light. Nothing. Just the apartment. Just the mess. Just me. I returned to the living room. My eyes kept darting to the window. The street below was empty. No lights flickered. No movement except the occasional sway of a loose branch. And yet I felt it. That presence. Pressing in from all sides. Silent but aware. I tried to imagine what had happened. A fight. A family argument gone wrong. Someone ran, someone hid. I tried to tell myself there was a logical explanation. But the apartment didn't feel logical. The air didn't feel logical. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I wasn't thinking clearly. I knelt by the kitchen floor examining the blood smear. Small, isolated, maybe from a cut. Maybe from something more. My flashlight flickered and I froze, heart thudding. Shadows moved in the corners, shifting, elongating, like they had a life of their own. My breath came fast, shallow. I told myself to calm down. Check for entry points. Look for witnesses. Standard procedure. But the feeling wouldn't let me. I moved toward the living room again, my boots soft on the carpet. The overturned chair caught my eye. I straightened it, then froze. The back of it bore scratches. Long, shallow, uneven. Not like a child. Not like furniture falling. Deliberate, almost human. But no blood. No fingerprints. Just the marks. My radio crackled. Unit 7, status? The dispatcher's voice sounded normal, casual, unaware. I swallowed. Clear, I said, even though I knew I wasn't. I wasn't clear. Nothing was clear. My voice sounded small, brittle in the silence. I decided to wait, sit, watch. Maybe the occupants would return. Maybe someone would explain the mess. I placed my back against the wall and tried to focus on my breathing. In, out, but every creak of the floor, every flicker of the lights, every draft of air from the window made me tense, made me feel that weight, that presence, that awareness. Time passed. Or maybe it didn't. Hard to tell in the fog of adrenaline and fear. The city outside remained silent. The fog pressed against the windows. The apartment seemed to contract around me, the walls leaning closer, the shadows deeper. And in that silence, I swore I heard it, a whisper, soft, almost inaudible. Not words, just a sound. Something trying to reach me. I froze, straining my ears. Nothing. But the hair on my arm stood on end. My stomach twisted. Something had been here. Or something had passed through. Or maybe something had been waiting. I checked every room again. Still empty. Still chaotic. But I knew. I knew I wasn't alone. Not really. Something had moved through this apartment. Something had left traces in the air, in the shadows, in the subtle shift of the furniture. And I felt it, pressing against me, unseen but undeniably there. I left the apartment around 4:30 a.m., locking the door behind me. My hands were shaking, heart still racing. I called dispatch, filed a report. Standard words on paper, meaningless. They would note the overturned chair, the small blood smear, the signs of struggle. But they wouldn't know. They couldn't know. Not the weight in the air, not the feeling of being watched, not the subtle movements that weren't there but were. The street was empty. Fog clung to the street lamps. The buildings leaned in close. I drove slowly, checking mirrors, expecting shadows to linger in the corners. Nothing moved. Nothing followed. And yet I knew I hadn't been alone. Not for a single second. Even now I think about that apartment. The scratches, the blood, the whispering weight, the cold corners. And I know when the night falls, when the fog rolls in, when the city sleeps, it is still there, waiting, watching. And I'll never know what left those marks. Or why it chose that apartment, or if it will ever come back. I should have expected it. I should have known that after the 3 a.m. noise call, the building would not let me go so easily. The apartment, the hallway, the floors, all of it seemed to remember. Every time I stepped back into that complex, the air felt heavier, thicker, like it had soaked up something I couldn't see. It was late again, near midnight, and I had been called back for a routine check. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises, footsteps, bangs, whispers. But when I arrived, everything was quiet. The street was empty. Fog rolled lazily between the streetlights, painting everything in a pale gray that made the building seem older, taller, and somehow more menacing. I stepped into the lobby, radio in hand, and flicked on my flashlight. The glow fell across cracked tiles and dusty corners. The smell of mildew lingered, and I could feel the building shift slightly under me, settling as if it had waited for my arrival. I told myself it was just an old building, old pipes, old wood, but my stomach twisted in ways that made me doubt even that simple explanation. I made my way to the 3rd floor. The hall stretched before me, dimly lit, the ceiling lights flickering intermittently. The walls, scuffed and worn, seemed to lean closer as I walked. Each step echoed, too sharp, too deliberate, bouncing back from the walls in a way that felt unnatural. I paused, listening. Nothing. But the stillness itself felt wrong. Then I heard it. A faint scuff like shoes dragging on the floor behind me. I froze. My flashlight trembled slightly in my grip. "Police," I whispered to the empty hall, almost expecting someone or something to answer. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the heater, the distant drip of water somewhere in the building. I moved forward slowly. Another scuff. Closer this time. I glanced over my shoulder. Empty hall. Nothing but shadows stretching under the dim lights. Yet I could feel it, like a presence shifting behind me, always at the edge of perception, always just out of reach. My pulse raced, and my breath caught in my throat. I tried to tell myself it was the wind through a cracked window, the building settling, but the air didn't move. And then I saw it. A shadow, longer than it should have been, flickering at the edge of my vision. I spun the flashlight toward it. Nothing. Just the peeling paint and the cracked linoleum floor. My heart hammered in my chest. I continued down the hall, every step deliberate, trying to convince myself it was imagination. But the hallway was changing subtly. Shadows shifted as I passed. Shapes moved in corners that should have been empty. And sometimes, just as I turned, I would catch a flicker, dark hair, the curve of a coat, something that resembled a person. And then it was gone. I reached apartment 3B again. The door was closed this time. I knocked. "Police! Anyone here?" My voice sounded too loud in the narrow hall. Nothing. No shuffle, no whisper, no answer. I tried the doorknob. Locked. Of course. I cursed under my breath. It was supposed to be a routine check. Routine. But the building didn't feel routine anymore. I walked back into the hall. That's when I noticed it. Shadows moving along the walls, shifting independently of the lights, pooling in corners, elongating unnaturally. I stopped, holding my flashlight steady. The shapes twisted and stretched, always just out of reach. I took a step back. They mimicked me, mirrored my movement, and then vanished when I turned fully to face them. The hallway seemed to pulse with life, or something like life. I could feel it in my bones, in the subtle vibration of the floor, in the hum of the lights. I called dispatch, voice tight. Unit 7 on the 3rd floor. Hallway appears clear, but I don't know. Something feels off, static. Copy that, Unit 7. Any sign of disturbance? Nothing, just shadows, movement, but no one's here. My words sounded absurd even as I spoke them, but I couldn't lie. Not to myself, not to anyone. I kept moving. Every corner, every apartment door, every flickering light, I checked. No one, nothing, just hallways stretching into darkness. And yet I couldn't shake it. That feeling that something was watching. Something that didn't belong. I reached the end of the hall and paused. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing behind me. I turned sharply. Empty. The lights flickered overhead. I strained my ears. Nothing. But the air felt heavy, as if filled with 1,000 unseen eyes pressing in, waiting. I walked back toward 3B, trying to focus on procedure, trying to anchor myself to reality. Check doors, note disturbances, document findings. Routine. Standard. And yet the shadows stretched longer as I approached, sliding along the walls, dark fingers reaching for me, just at the edges of the light. My flashlight flickered. I cursed under my breath. Another scuff behind me, closer. I spun. Empty hall. My pulse raced. My hands shook. I could feel it. Something there, pressing against the space I moved through. Not flesh, not bone, not air, but something. I knocked on 3B again. Police. Anyone home? Silence. Then a whisper. Soft. Almost imperceptible. Not words. Not language. Just a sound that crawled across the walls, brushing against my ears. My stomach knotted. I strained to locate it, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I took a step back. The shadows twisted. One moved independently, curling toward me like smoke, stretching up the wall. I blinked. Gone. Only the dim light and the peeling paint remained. The hallway felt alive. I could hear the faintest echoes, footsteps in corners that had no floorboards, voices that weren't voices, murmurs in the air. I gripped the flashlight tighter, knuckles white. Tried to steady my breathing. Tried to convince myself it was the building, the fog outside, exhaustion, stress. But none of it explained the shapes, the movement, the pressure behind my spine. I walked slowly back to the stairs. The shadows followed, pooling at the edges of my vision. I turned sharply. Nothing. I turned again. A shape at the end of the hall, standing where no one should be. Dark hair, thin coat, just like before. I blinked. Gone. Only the hallway stretched empty before me. I descended the stairs cautiously. The shadows flickered against the walls, always at the periphery. Never fully there, never fully absent. I reached the lobby, breathed a shaky sigh, and radioed dispatch. All clear. Hallway empty. No occupants, but I knew it wasn't clear. The weight, the pressure, the eyes in the darkness, they hadn't left. I could feel them in the spaces I couldn't see, the corners I couldn't illuminate, the hallways that should have been empty. I left the building, stepping onto the quiet street. Fog rolled in from the north, thick and curling. The streetlights glared weakly through the mist. The apartment loomed behind me, silent and still. But I knew it remembered. I knew the hallways would stretch in my mind long after I left, filled with shadows and whispers that were not mine, not human, not real in any way I could touch. I drove away slowly. Mirrors checked constantly. The fog pressed against the windshield. My hands shook on the wheel. Every shadow in the mist made me flinch, and I knew that what I had seen, or what had seen me, would return. That the halls, the walls, the shadows, they all had memory. They all had weight, and I would never be able to erase it. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Images of moving shadows, twisting corners, soft whispers, curling fog pressed against my mind. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the hallway stretch before me. Shadows bending unnaturally, and I felt it again. The pressure in the air. The weight behind my spine. The sense that something was always there, just beyond perception. I know the building is still empty. I know no one occupies it at this hour. But I also know the shadows are alive in some way. I feel them when I drive by, when I patrol, when I think I am alone. And I know deep down that they will wait. Waiting for the next call, the next footstep, the next person to walk down those hallways and see, just for a moment, that the shadows are not simply absence, but presence. I haven't returned to the building since. Not for calls, not for checks. But sometimes, when I drive past in the early hours, when the fog is thick and the streetlights are dim, I swear I see movement in the upper windows. Shadows stretching unnaturally, curling around corners that shouldn't exist. And I remember the hallways, the whispers, the presence that wasn't supposed to be there but was. Some things leave traces you cannot erase. Some shadows remember the people who walk past them. And some buildings wait. They wait in silence, in fog, in the twisting echoes of halls where no one should be. And I know that, if I go back, they will remember me too. It should have been a simple follow-up. Just checking the apartment again, documenting what I had already seen, filing the reports, making sure everything was secured, but something inside me told me not to go back. That little voice, the one that whispers caution when logic isn't enough, was screaming this time. I ignored it. It's what I do, what we all do as officers. We ignore the instincts that keep ordinary people alive. The street was quiet when I pulled up. Fog lay thick on the asphalt, curling around the street lamps and leaking into the cracks of the sidewalks. The apartment building loomed, gray and tired, heavier somehow than I remembered. The air smelled faintly of damp and mildew, but under it something else, something sharp, metallic, unplaceable. I drew my flashlight as I entered the lobby. Nothing moved. The elevator hummed faintly, doors opening with a groan. I stepped in, pressed the third-floor button, and waited. The shaft rattled. My pulse picked up. I tried to tell myself it was just an old building, old machinery, old pipes, but the hum felt too deliberate, too alive. When I reached the floor, the hallway stretched out, dim and unevenly lit. The walls, scuffed and cracked, seemed almost darker this time, as if they had absorbed the fog, the shadows, and my own unease. And then I noticed it. Small slips of paper taped to the doors, the walls, even the floor in some places. Handwritten notes. I froze. My flashlight trembled slightly in my grip as I approached the first one. The handwriting was jagged, uneven, almost desperate. The words were simple, but their meaning Their weight hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. Don't look behind you. I swallowed hard. My hand tightened around the flashlight. My eyes darted down the hall, scanning the shadows. Nothing. Just the usual dim hallway, the peeling paint, the flickering lights. I told myself it was a joke, a prank, maybe even someone trying to scare me. But the note felt different, personal, intended. I moved forward slowly, each note more unsettling than the last. One read, "She sees everything you do." Another, "Some doors are better left closed." The handwriting varied slightly, different pressure, different size, but the message was consistent. Watching, waiting, awareness. I couldn't shake the feeling that the notes weren't just warnings. They were signs. Maps of attention, markers of presence. And I knew deep down that something or someone had left them for me specifically. I reached apartment 3B again. The door was slightly ajar. I hesitated, flashlight raised. The air was colder here, heavier, almost viscous. I pushed the door open. Nothing immediate, just the usual mess. The overturned chair, the scattered clothes, the faint scent of old alcohol. But something was different. Photos, Polaroid style, pinned haphazardly to the walls, the door, even the ceiling in some spots. Faces, smiling faces. The family. But not just that. Some photos were of empty streets, foggy roads, hallways. Some were of me, taken from angles that would have been impossible without someone watching. My patrol car in the distance, the street lamp outside the apartment. My own hands, flashlight in hand, reflected in mirrors. I stepped back. Heart hammering, my mouth dry, my knees weak. Someone or something had been here, watching, following, documenting. And now they, or it, had left these notes and photos deliberately, waiting for me to notice, waiting for my reaction. I flipped through more of the notes I hadn't seen yet. Simple sentences, cryptic warnings, too late to leave. They never sleep. The fog remembers you, each one pressed against my chest, cold and sharp. I felt watched, undeniably, inescapably watched. I spun slowly, flashlight sweeping the room. Shadows pooled in corners, stretched across walls. Something felt alive in the darkness, moving just beyond the light. Not physical, not tangible, but weighty, aware, present. I tried to reason with myself. Exhaustion, stress, paranoia, hallucinations, all plausible. I'm a human being. I've seen things in the dark that weren't there, but none of it explained the notes, the photos. None of it explained the deliberate placement, the knowledge of my patrol, my habits, my presence. Someone or something knew me, and it wanted me to know. I left the apartment briefly, checking the hallway again. The fog outside pressed against the windows, curling like smoke. Shadows shifted independently of the light. I could hear faint scuffs behind me, deliberate but impossible to locate. I called dispatch, voice shaking. Unit 7. Nothing. Unusual at the building. Apartment secure. Over. Copy that, Unit 7. Standard response. Professional calm. But I knew better. I knew the weight in the air, the unplaceable presence, the deliberate gaze that followed me down every hallway. I returned to 3B. Something compelled me to check the photos again. I tried to rationalize, to catalog. Faces, places, times. But the longer I looked, the more my mind frayed. Details seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly. Shadows bent impossibly. The fog outside thickened unnaturally, curling past the windows into the hallway. And I felt it again. The weight, the attention, the awareness. A note near the window caught my eye. Single line, jagged letters. I'm closer than you think. I froze. The words felt alive, crawling across the wall, pressing against my ribs. My pulse jumped. I spun, flashlight sweeping the room. Shadows stretched unnaturally, corners darker than they should have been. And then I felt it. Behind me, not touching, not physical, but there, the pressure of a presence that wasn't mine. Watching, waiting. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. My own reflection in the scattered photos seemed wrong. Elongated, eyes wider, staring. I blinked. It shifted. A shadow passed behind me in one frame, though no one was there. I realized then that the room itself seemed to breathe. The walls, the ceiling, even the air pressed with awareness. I backed toward the door. Every step echoed unnaturally, the shadows stretching, reaching. I tried to leave, but my mind didn't cooperate. Logic fought instinct. Paranoia clawed at reason. Every corner, every shadow, every whisper in the fog outside screamed that I was being watched, that the apartment wasn't empty, that the notes and photos weren't just warnings, they were invitations. I left finally, stepping into the hallway. The fog outside the building seemed thicker now, curling into the lobby across the floor. Shadows pooled in corners, lingering, almost human. I felt their gaze following me. I didn't turn. I didn't look. I just moved. Outside, the street was empty. My patrol car waited. I got in, locking the doors behind me, but I knew it wouldn't stop. Not really. The presence, the watching, the notes. They were imprinted on the building, the air, the fog. And on me. I drove slowly, constantly checking mirrors, eyes flicking to shadows in the street, in alleyways, even in the fog rolling between the street lamps. My pulse raced. My hands shook. I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, just fear, just imagination. But I knew that the building, the notes, the photos, they had changed something. Something followed me now. Something that was closer than I thought. At home, I couldn't sleep. Not really. The notes and photographs replayed in my mind. Shadows bent in corners. Faces shifted in the frames, staring. The weight of the presence pressed against my chest. I felt it in the empty apartment, in my patrol car, in the fog outside my window. And I understood then that the line between reality and paranoia had blurred completely. The notes were not just warnings. They were instructions. They were proof that something, someone, knew me intimately, tracked me, waited for me. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it wouldn't stop. The fog outside thickened. The shadows in the corners of my apartment seemed heavier, longer. I felt eyes on me even in the dark. And I realized fully that the presence wasn't confined to the building anymore. It had followed me, infiltrated my mind, haunted my thoughts. I haven't gone back. I don't think I can. Not yet. And yet, every night I feel it. Watching. Closer than I think. Waiting. I should have left. I really should have. Every instinct screamed at me to get in the car, drive away, and never come back. But some compulsion, call it curiosity, call it duty, call it foolishness, kept me in the apartment. 3B. The same place that had already shown me shadows in the hall, notes that weren't meant for anyone but me, photographs that tracked my every move. I locked the door behind me and immediately I regretted it. The apartment felt different this time. Smaller, heavier. The air hung thick, damp, and metallic, pressing down on my shoulders. Every surface seemed darker, sharper, almost alive in its stillness. The faint smell of alcohol and mildew was stronger, mixed with something else, something I couldn't place. It was a smell that made my stomach twist and my throat tighten. I moved slowly, flashlight in hand, checking corners, listening. The apartment was empty, I told myself. Empty and harmless, but the silence was wrong. The silence pressed against my ears, filled with expectation, with something waiting just out of sight. My footsteps echoed unnaturally against the walls, bouncing back in irregular, almost mocking patterns. I sat down on the edge of the couch, hands trembling, and tried to rationalize. Notes, photos, shadows, pressure, all of it could be explained. Someone sneaking into the apartment. A prank? My mind playing tricks? But my chest knew the truth. The weight in the air. The feeling that someone, or something, was observing me from everywhere and nowhere at once. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time didn't feel real. The lights flickered intermittently, shadows stretching, twisting, pooling at the edges of my vision. Every time I moved my flashlight, the darkness seemed to recoil, then creep closer, as if it was alive. I tried to ignore it, tried to read one of the notes again, but my eyes refused to focus. The words wavered, blurred. When I looked away, the paper seemed to twitch slightly, like it remembered being read. I moved toward the bedroom. The door, slightly ajar, seemed to breathe in the dim light. I opened it fully. The bed was unmade, clothes tossed across the floor. And then I noticed something new. A line of footprints. Bare, small, not quite human. They crossed the room in a path I hadn't seen before, starting near the closet and ending near the window. I froze. Footprints don't appear out of nowhere. Not like this. Not in an empty apartment. And yet, here they were. Fresh. Damp from the condensation on the windows. I traced one lightly with my finger, feeling the cold imprint of something that shouldn't exist. My pulse quickened. Every nerve in my body screamed to leave, but I couldn't. Something held me in place, some mixture of fear and fascination that rooted me to the floor. I turned back toward the living room. Shadows pooled in corners, not static, not just the absence of light. They moved, slowly, subtly, following me, watching. I spun the flashlight, sweeping the room, trying to catch something concrete. Nothing, only darkness. But the darkness felt aware. And the moment my gaze left it, it shifted again, as if testing my attention, as if it knew how to manipulate me. I tried to focus on something mundane. My patrol reports, the clock on the wall, anything to anchor me to reality, but the numbers on the clock blurred. The hands jittered unnaturally, then stopped. I blinked. They moved again. Time didn't behave here. Or maybe my mind didn't. Either way, I was trapped. Trapped in a place that refused the laws of the world outside. I moved to the kitchen, hands shaking. The counter was scattered with shards of a plate I didn't remember breaking. A faint smear of red ran along the edge, darker than it should have been. I touched it lightly with my fingertip. Warm? Fresh? Impossible. I had been alone. I hadn't been here before tonight. And yet, it was undeniably there. The lights flickered again, longer this time, plunging the apartment into near darkness. I froze, listening. Footsteps. Soft, slow, deliberate, pacing behind me. I spun. Empty. Only the faint hum of the heater. My flashlight beam bounced across the walls, illuminating nothing, and yet I felt it. Someone there, just beyond the light. I tried the door. Locked. Not by me. I checked the handle, jiggled it, pushed it. Nothing. I pounded on it with both hands. "Police, let me out!" My voice echoed, swallowed by the apartment, distorted, returning to me in warped shapes that weren't quite my own. Nothing answered. The hallway outside remained silent. The fog pressed against the window, thick and curling, curling, curling. I backed away from the door, heart hammering. I realized then that leaving wasn't an option. Not tonight. The apartment had claimed me, at least temporarily. The shadows, the notes, the weight, they weren't done. Not with me. And I couldn't fight them, couldn't reason with them, couldn't escape them. I sat down on the couch again, hugging my knees, flashlight quivering in my grip. The shadows stretched across the walls, moving slowly now, pooling at the corners, flickering in and out, always just beyond focus. I felt them watching, waiting, learning. Something about the way the darkness pressed against me was sentient, calculating. Hours passed. The air thickened. The temperature dropped. My breath formed faint clouds in front of my face. And then I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. Not footsteps this time. Not a whisper, a scream. High-pitched, guttural, echoing from every wall at once. And yet, it wasn't human. It didn't come from a throat. It was everywhere and nowhere. I dropped the flashlight, hands over my ears, trying to block it out. And then, silence. Absolute silence. My heart pounded in my ears. My fingers shook uncontrollably. I dared to open my eyes. The shadows were gone. The apartment was still. Empty. The fog outside had receded slightly. And yet, the weight remained. A lingering presence, invisible but undeniable, pressing against my chest and my mind. I tried to speak. Tried to call dispatch. My voice cracked. "Unit 7, I need assistance. Please." Nothing. My radio had gone dead, or maybe it never transmitted. I couldn't tell anymore. Every attempt to anchor myself to the world outside failed. I was trapped in the apartment with the shadows, with the notes, with the memories of that scream. I moved to the kitchen, picking up the shards of the plate, trying to make sense of anything. Every fragment glinted oddly in the dim light, reflecting shapes that weren't there. Faces, fleeting, distorted, twisting in agony. My hands shook so badly that I dropped them again. I couldn't stop seeing them. I couldn't stop hearing the echoes of the scream. And I couldn't stop feeling it. The weight, the awareness, the undeniable presence pressing closer. I tried to sleep. I lay down on the couch, covering my head with a coat, but sleep refused me. Every time my eyes closed, I felt it leaning closer, watching, waiting. The apartment seemed to breathe around me, alive, aware, calculating. And I knew that whatever had screamed, whatever had left the notes had not gone. Not really. It lingered in every shadow, in every corner, in every flicker of the dim lights. I spent the night listening, counting, breathing, every small noise, a creak, a whisper, a shift in the air, made me flinch. I felt as if I had been transported into a world where time didn't exist, where shadows were alive, and where reality had warped just enough to trap me inside it. When the first light of dawn touched the windows, pale and gray, I dared to move. The apartment seemed calmer. The shadows receded slightly, but the weight remained. My hands were raw from gripping surfaces, my knees scraped from pacing, my mind frayed. And I realized something that I will never forget. I was not alone. Never truly alone. Not in this apartment, not in the world, not in the silence. I left eventually, stepping into the weak morning light. The fog had lifted, the streets were quiet, the building looked ordinary, too ordinary. I glanced back once, seeing nothing through the windows, nothing that would suggest the horrors of the night. And yet I knew. The apartment had remembered me, and it would remember me again. I don't know what screamed. I don't know what left the notes or the photos. I don't know what haunted the shadows. But I do know this. Some places are alive in ways we cannot understand. Some presences linger long after they should have gone, and some screams echo forever even when the air itself returns to stillness. I will never forget that night. The shadows, the weight, the scream, the silence. I don't think I ever want to go back, and yet I know I will. Because some part of me, the part that survived the night, can't help but return, drawn to the presence, drawn to the apartment, drawn to the darkness that watches, locked in, alone, and waiting. The call came just as the fog was rolling in, thick and gray, curling along the streets like it had a life of its own. A neighbor had reported hearing children crying in the old park on the east side, a place that had been closed for years after a series of accidents and complaints. The gates were locked, the playground rusted and overgrown, but something about the report sent a shiver down my spine. I drove slowly, headlights cutting through the mist, the radio quiet except for the hum of the engine. The streets were empty, the fog making every shadow deeper, longer, as if the night itself were leaning in to watch. I parked near the entrance of the park, the chain-link fence groaning in the wind, or maybe it was just the sound I imagined. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, feeling the cold press through my uniform. The gates were still locked, padlocked with rusted metal. I shone my light through the links, trying to pierce the fog. The playground lay beyond, swings hanging still, the slide dark and slick with dew, jungle gyms tangled in weeds. Nothing moved. Nothing cried. The silence pressed in like a weight, and then I heard it. A faint wail somewhere beyond the trees. Soft at first, almost hesitant, like a child testing the edges of its voice. I froze, listening. There it was again, a higher, sharper cry echoing across the empty park. I raised my flashlight, sweeping the swings, the slide, the overgrown paths. Nothing, no one. Just shadows twisting in the fog. I moved forward cautiously, my boots sinking slightly into the damp grass. Every step sounded louder than it should, echoing across the empty park. The swings creaked gently, though the air was still. My flashlight caught them, a gentle sway, as if pushed by invisible hands. I swallowed hard. Logic told me it was the wind, but there wasn't a breeze. Nothing stirred except the faint motion of the swings, moving slowly, almost deliberately. I called into the fog, voice trembling slightly. "Hello, anyone here?" My words were swallowed by the mist. The silence returned, thicker this time, almost tangible. My pulse raced. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe some kids had sneaked in, maybe someone was playing a trick, maybe it was the stress of night patrol catching up. But instinct told me none of those explanations fit. The cries came again, closer now, coming from the far side of the playground. I swept my flashlight that way and my stomach dropped. The swings, just a moment ago empty, now moved faster, more insistently, as if responding to the cries. I took a step back, heart pounding. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles, around my legs, pressing in from all sides. I moved toward the swings, each step deliberate, every nerve in my body screaming to turn back. The cries grew louder, sharper, almost panicked. But when I reached the swings, there was nothing there. No children, no one. Just the swaying seats, moving without touch, suspended in the fog like ghosts. I knelt down, shining my flashlight under the swings. Dew-soaked grass, empty chains, no footprints, no signs of intrusion, nothing to explain it. And yet I knew I hadn't imagined it. The cries, the motion, the weight in the air. Something had been here. Something unseen, but undeniably present. I stood, trying to steady my breathing, trying to convince myself to call it in and leave. But something held me there, a mixture of fear and fascination, forcing me to look closer, to understand what I could not. I walked past the slide, flashlight cutting through the fog. Every shadow seemed to twitch at the edge of my vision, moving just as I turned away. My pulse thudded painfully. Then I saw it, a small figure, pale and fleeting, standing at the far edge of the playground, barely visible in the fog. It was a child, or something like one, thin and still, with dark hair plastered against a face I couldn't see clearly. I called out softly, "Hey, you okay? Are you lost?" The figure didn't move, didn't answer, just stared, blank and motionless. I stepped closer, heart hammering, and it disappeared. Not walked away, not hidden behind something, vanished, as if it had been a trick of the fog, or a shadow taking human form for a moment. My hands shook. My flashlight flickered. I heard the cries again, surrounding me now from every direction. My rational mind screamed that there was no one, that it was just the fog, the wind, maybe my imagination. But the sound was too real, too human, too desperate. I spun in a circle, flashlight cutting through the mist, and the swing swayed harder, faster in response. Panic rose in my chest. I backed toward the fence, trying to keep the cries ahead of me, trying to reach the safety of the patrol car. But the fog thickened, curling around my legs, pulling my vision into whiteness. The playground became a blur of shapes, of motion, of swaying chains that moved without reason, without wind, without touch. I stumbled slightly, hand gripping the chain-link fence. I could feel the metal cold and real, grounding me, but the cries didn't stop. They pressed into my ears, into my chest, a physical weight. I shone my flashlight across the park one last time. The figure appeared again, fleeting, standing near the slide, just at the edge of the fog. It stared at me, and then the air went still. Quiet. Absolute silence, heavy and suffocating. I didn't stay to see what happened next. I ran to my car, fog curling around me, sticks snapping underfoot, heart racing. I fumbled with the keys, sliding into the seat, locking the doors. The engine roared to life. I didn't look back. I drove away slowly, headlights cutting through the lingering mist, every muscle tense, every nerve alive. Even now, thinking back, I can't explain it. The swings, the cries, the figure that vanished into the fog. The park had been closed for years. Children shouldn't have been there. And yet whatever I saw, whatever I heard, was undeniable, real, and it left a mark on me. A lingering awareness that some places, some nights, hold echoes of things that should have been long gone. I filed my report, tried to rationalize, tried to convince myself it was stress, fatigue, imagination. But I know better. There was something in that park, something alive in the fog, something that moved without touch, that cried without reason. And I know if I go back at night, I'll hear it again. The children's cries, the swaying swings, the unseen presence waiting, just beyond the mist, watching, patient, eternal. I don't want to go back. I shouldn't go back. But I know I will, because some part of me needs to understand, needs to see it again. Needs to face the presence in the fog that doesn't belong in the world of the living, and yet insists on existing anyway, just beyond reach, just beyond sight. Always there. The fog had thickened since my first visit, wrapping the park in a choking white blanket that seemed to absorb every sound. The air was damp and cold, clinging to my uniform, settling in my lungs. The streetlights outside the park barely pierced it, leaving shadows that weren't quite shadows and shapes that weren't quite real. I stepped past the locked gate again, flashlight cutting a narrow swath through the mist. I didn't know why I came back. Duty? Curiosity? The part of me that needed to understand the impossible? Maybe all of it. I told myself this time would be different, that I would see nothing. That logic would hold sway over fear. The playground was worse than I remembered. Rusted slides twisted at odd angles, the jungle gym sagging under its own age, weeds snaking up the supports like greedy fingers. And everywhere, the air smelled of damp wood, rot, and something else. Something sharp, metallic, almost like blood. My stomach knotted, but I forced myself forward. I noticed the toys first. Small things, scattered across the wet grass, covered in mud and dew. Dolls with cracked porcelain faces, their eyes staring blankly into the fog. A faded teddy bear, fur matted and torn, lying near the swings. A small toy truck, wheels stuck in the grass as if abandoned mid-journey. Each one seemed to have been left deliberately, placed like markers in a pattern I couldn't yet read. I picked up the teddy bear, cold, wet, heavy with damp. Its stitched mouth seemed to smile, but the expression felt wrong, twisted, as if it were aware I held it. I set it down quickly, shivering, telling myself it was just a toy that had been left behind when children moved on. But I knew better. These weren't random toys, not scattered by accident, not forgotten. They had been left, waiting. Footprints caught my attention next. Small, bare, human-like, but wrong. They didn't match any child I knew, any shoe or boot. They were spaced oddly, elongated in places, compressed in others, as if whoever or whatever had made them didn't walk like a living person. They led from the edge of the playground into the misty trees beyond, vanishing into nothing. I followed cautiously, boots sinking into the wet grass, flashlight beam cutting through the fog. Every step seemed louder than it should have been, echoing faintly, though there was no one else here to hear. The fog wrapped around me, curling like smoke, hiding the path ahead, and every so often I thought I saw movement, something slipping between the trees just beyond vision. A doll lay at the base of a tree. Its face was intact, wide eyes staring at me, arms outstretched as if begging for something. I knelt to examine it. The mud clung to its clothes, making the colors dark and sinister. I touched the small frozen hands and felt a shiver that ran straight through me. How long had it been here? Days? Weeks? And yet it felt fresh. Too fresh. As if it had been placed only moments before. The fog thickened further. Every sound was amplified. The drip of water from leaves, the scrape of branches, the faint whisper of wind through the trees. But beneath those natural noises, I felt something else. Presence. Awareness. Something that wasn't part of the world around me, but was undeniably there. Watching. Waiting. I followed the footprints farther, and the playground disappeared behind me. Rusted metal and rotting wood gave way to overgrown paths and thick fog, making it impossible to tell where the park ended and the woods began. The footprints led me deeper, and the toys became more scattered, arranged almost ritualistically. A small rocking horse leaned against a tree, tilted at an impossible angle. A set of blocks spelled out something I couldn't read, blurred by mud and time, but the pattern was deliberate. Someone or something had left these as messages. The hair on my neck prickled. My flashlight flickered, and in that brief darkness, I thought I saw a figure move between the trees. I froze, heart hammering, eyes scanning, nothing. But the sense of being watched pressed closer, heavier. I felt my pulse in my throat. I tried to tell myself it was just imagination. Fog, shadows, my mind playing tricks after the first visit. But that rational voice was drowned by instinct. Instinct that screamed there was more here than toys and footprints. Instinct that told me to leave. But curiosity, that dangerous thing, held me in place. Another doll, this one headless, lay near a clump of weeds. its body positioned unnaturally, legs splayed, arms reaching toward me. I stepped closer. The doll's eyes, or rather the sockets where they should have been, seemed to pull at me. My stomach turned. I realized then that the toys weren't abandoned. They were arranged, placed to evoke fear, to guide attention, to mark a trail I was not supposed to follow. The footprints continued into the denser fog, vanishing completely after a few steps. I paused, hand on my flashlight, listening. Silence. Or maybe something quieter than silence. The kind of sound that presses on your chest without moving air. A presence so subtle it's felt, rather than heard. I turned slowly, scanning the area. Shadows moved in ways that didn't align with the fog or the trees. Shapes slipped at the edge of vision, disappearing when I tried to focus. I realized then that the toys were markers, yes, but also warnings. They were the residue of something that had been here before me, something that lingered in the fog, in the shadows, in the spaces between. I felt it again then, a weight, a pressure, an awareness pressing in on me from all sides. I was not alone, not really. I walked back toward the playground, every step deliberate, trying to stay grounded. The swings still swayed, moving on their own, though there was no wind. I watched, heart in my throat, and for a moment, I could have sworn the chains rattled like whispered words. A doll rocked slightly on the wet grass. A toy truck moved a few inches. I blinked. Nothing. Or maybe something just beyond seeing. The fog seemed to pulse, thickening around me, curling like smoke, almost tactile. Every shadow stretched and moved independently. The trees twisted slightly when I wasn't looking, bending toward me, away from me, always at the edge of comprehension. My chest tightened. My hands shook on the flashlight. I could feel it breathing around me, a presence not human, not alive in any way I could understand, but undeniably aware. I took a step back, tripping slightly over a root. My flashlight caught on a toy, one I hadn't noticed before. A small rocking horse, worn wood, chipped paint, face painted in a smile too wide, too fixed. It rocked gently, and I swear I saw the shape of a child crouched just behind it, tiny hand reaching out toward me. I spun, nothing, fog and shadows. Silence, except for my own ragged breathing. I turned to leave, slowly, each step measured, mind racing. But the path seemed to stretch unnaturally, the fog curling tighter, the shadows reaching. Another doll appeared at my feet, small, stuffed wet, its head tilted up at me, stitched smile staring through the mist. I kicked it aside, trying not to panic, trying to rationalize. But my mind was fraying. The toys, the footprints, the fog, the shadows, they were all alive, all aware, all waiting. The park wasn't just abandoned. It had been claimed by something that lingered in the fog, that moved in the shadows, that watched in silence. I could feel it pressing closer, though I could see nothing, hear nothing beyond the drip of dew in my own heartbeat. The toys, the footprints, they weren't the work of a child. They were the residue of whatever this presence was, marking territory, leaving signs, asserting awareness of my intrusion. I ran then, boots sinking in the wet grass, fog curling around my legs, the swings rattling behind me as if in protest. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the park, the locked gate, the thin streetlight illuminating the wet pavement. I shoved the gate, gritting my teeth, and slipped through, heart hammering, sweat and fog mixing on my skin. Even as I drove away, I could feel the weight of it pressing in, the awareness lingering. The fog followed me in my mind, curling around every shadow, every reflection. The toys, the footprints, the figure that vanished, the rocking horse. I couldn't shake them. And I knew I never would. Somewhere in that fog, something waited. Something patient, aware, and impossible to understand. And I knew that the toys, decayed and forgotten though they seemed, were not forgotten at all. They were waiting, watching, marking a trail I might follow again. I don't want to go back. I shouldn't, but some part of me knows that I will. Because the presence that left the toys, that made the footprints, that moves in the fog, it isn't done with me. And I have this terrible, undeniable feeling that the next time I see the toys, the fog, and the shadows, I won't be alone. The fog was worse tonight. denser, heavier, curling along the paths of the old park like it wanted to smother everything in its path. I parked at the edge of the street, the headlights cutting only a narrow line through the mist. I shouldn't have come back. I knew that as soon as I stepped out of the car. Every instinct in me screamed to leave the playground behind, to drive away and forget the children's cries, the abandoned toys, the footprints. But I couldn't. Something about the park called me, drew me in, and I hated myself for answering. I stepped over the rusted gate, flashlight trembling in my hand. The swings were still, though the chains rattled faintly, responding to the fog or maybe to my presence. My boots sank slightly into the wet grass. Everything was quiet except the soft crunch beneath my feet. But the quiet pressed against me, heavy and insistent, like it had a weight I could feel in my chest. I made my way to the slide, the paint peeling and slick with moisture. I remembered the first visit, how the figure had appeared at the edge of the playground, pale and fleeting. I told myself it was just imagination, but even as I said it, I felt eyes on me, a presence. Invisible but unmistakable, pressing from the fog, from the shadows, from somewhere beyond understanding. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, low, almost like the wind rustling through dead leaves. I froze, flashlight raised, scanning the misty playground. Nothing, just the swings swaying gently, the jungle gym sagging under its own weight, and the fog curling around the slide. The whisper came again. Slightly clearer this time. A name. My name. I swallowed hard, throat dry. My pulse jumped. Hello? My voice cracked in the damp air. Silence returned, heavy and oppressive. Then a second whisper, closer, urgent, almost accusing. Officer! I spun slowly, flashlight cutting through the fog. The slide loomed ahead, rusted and ominous. Its metal surface glinted wetly in the beam, and I thought I saw movement at the top. A small figure, crouched, but not entirely human in shape. My chest tightened. My stomach twisted. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. Something held me in place. Fear, curiosity, some dangerous mixture of both. The whisper came again. My full name, drawn out slowly, deliberately, echoing in the fog. I took a step back, fumbling with my flashlight, trying to find the source. Nothing. No one. Just fog, rusted metal, and shadows that seemed to twitch at the edge of my vision. I approached the slide cautiously, each step measured. The whispers followed, shifting direction as I moved, coming from everywhere and nowhere. I bent over the base, shining the light under it. Mud, wet leaves, nothing else. I straightened, trying to steady my breathing. The fog swirled around me, thickening, curling at my legs like smoke. Then a voice, closer this time, sharper. Look! I spun, heart hammering. The top of the slide was empty, and yet I felt it. Presence. Watching. Waiting. My chest tightened again, pressure pressing down on me. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching, bending, curling toward me. I took another step back. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, layering on top of each other. Dozens of voices all speaking my name at once, overlapping, echoing in the fog. I stumbled, hand brushing the wet metal of the slide. The whispers surged, pressing closer, closer, until it felt like they were inside my head, rattling my thoughts, probing memories I hadn't shared with anyone. I blinked and the fog shifted. The figure appeared, small, crouched at the top again, watching, waiting. Its face was hidden in shadow, but I felt its gaze, sharp and penetrating. I tried to rationalize. Exhaustion. Stress. My mind fracturing under the weight of isolation and fear. Maybe that was it. Maybe the park, the fog, the toys, all of it was warping my perception. But I knew better. Instinct told me this was something real. Something that had been here long before me and would remain long after. Something that targeted me specifically. The whispers changed. Not just my name now, but phrases. Commands, warnings, accusations. You shouldn't be here. Leave. Remember. My head spun. The fog thickened further, curling around my arms, legs, pressing at my shoulders, filling my senses. I couldn't tell up from down, left from right. The slide loomed, taller than it should, rusted edges glinting like teeth in the flashlight beam. I stumbled backward, tripping over a small toy, a doll, cracked porcelain, staring up at me with empty eyes. I kicked it aside, heart hammering. The whispers surged, louder, more chaotic. Multiple voices overlapping, each one speaking my name with urgency, anger, and something else I couldn't identify. Something older, patient, eternal. I tried to speak. "Who's there?" My voice sounded small, weak, insignificant. The fog swallowed it immediately. The whispers answered, layering on top of each other. My name, repeated, distorted, drawn out. "Officer." "Watch! Don't leave!" The slide's top shimmered in the flashlight beam. And there it was. A hand, pale and small, reaching over the edge. Not quite human in shape, too long, too thin. Fingers stretching toward me, but the rest of the figure remained obscured by fog. My breath caught. I tried to step back. My boots sank slightly in the wet grass. The whispers intensified, urgent, commanding, circling around my head. I wanted to run, wanted to break free, but my legs refused. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but something else held me, drawn, compelled. The whispers weren't just calling me, they were beckoning, pulling me forward, testing my attention. Measuring my fear, I blinked, and the hand vanished. The slide seemed empty again. The fog thickened, twisting, curling around me. I felt it all at once. The awareness, the presence, the invisible gaze pressing from the mist, from the shadows, from the edges of perception. And I understood. This place, the park, the slide, the toys, the fog, they were not just remnants of some old playground. They were alive. They remembered me. They knew me, and they were testing me. I stumbled backward, my flashlight beam trembling across the swings, the jungle gym, the slide. Shadows pooled, moving just beyond the reach of light. The whispers continued, following me, relentless, layered, speaking my name and commands, accusations and warnings. I wanted to leave, but every step away felt slower, heavier, as if the fog itself resisted my escape. I finally reached the edge of the playground, the chain-link fence looming like a barrier, promising safety. My hands shook as I gripped it, the fog pressing, curling, whispering. I swung the gate open, my boots slipping slightly in the mud, and ran toward my patrol car. The whispers didn't stop. Even as I slid into the driver's seat, locked the doors, started the engine, I could feel them pressing against me, insistent, eternal, driving away. I kept glancing back through the fog, through the trees, through the park. The slide loomed in memory, its rusted edges sharp and sinister. The figure, the hand, the whispers. They lingered. Even when the fog thinned on the road ahead, even when the streetlights returned, I could feel it. That weight, that awareness, that sense that I had been targeted, watched, chosen for something I didn't understand. I filed my report, tried to rationalize. Fatigue, stress, imagination. But I know better. I know that the park, the slide, the whispers, they are alive in ways we cannot explain. They remember, they wait, and I know, deep down, that I will hear my name again, whispered from the fog, calling me back to the slide, to the park, to the weight and presence that will not let me go. I shouldn't return. I know I shouldn't, but part of me, the part that survived tonight, feels drawn to it, feels compelled to step back into the fog, to hear the whispers, to face the awareness that watches from shadows and slides and rusted toys, because it remembers me. And it knows my name. I shouldn't have come back. I knew it the moment I stepped out of my patrol car and into the thick, suffocating fog that had settled over the park again. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to drive away, to forget the toys, the whispers, the slide. But I couldn't. Not after the voices. Not after the eyes in the fog. Some part of me, the part that didn't belong to reason, drew me deeper. The trees loomed over the path, skeletal and black against the gray mist, branches twisting like claws. Every step I took pressed against the silence, making it heavier, almost tactile. My flashlight cut a narrow swath through the fog, illuminating wet leaves and twisted roots, but it felt like nothing could truly pierce the haze. I moved slowly, deliberately, my hands gripping the flashlight tightly, trying to keep my racing mind under control, and then I saw them. Faces. Pale, thin, twisted faces among the branches. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fog, shadows forming patterns my eyes wanted to recognize. But no, they were real. Eyes glinting faintly, mouths open in silent screams, frozen expressions of anguish or fear, or something worse. They weren't moving, not exactly, but they were watching. Always watching, I froze. My pulse leapt, a hammering that rattled my chest. My hands shook, flashlight beam wobbling. "Hello?" I called out, my voice small, swallowed by the fog. Silence answered. But the faces didn't disappear. They remained, pale and deliberate, peering from the branches, just out of reach, just out of understanding. I tried to rationalize. Exhaustion, stress, imagination. That had worked before. But this was different. These faces weren't illusions. They weren't shapes my mind was forcing me to see. Their awareness pressed against me. Each twisted, silent expression held intent, and I could feel it. My stomach twisted with fear. My throat tightened. I wanted to run, but my legs refused to obey. A branch scraped against my shoulder. I jumped, spinning, flashlight darting across the trees. More faces appeared in the branches I hadn't noticed before. Some near, some distant, their pale eyes reflecting faint glimmers of my flashlight. I realized I was surrounded. Not physically, but in some other way. Surrounded in a space that twisted, that folded in on itself, that didn't obey the rules of reality I knew. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. The fog thickened, curling around me like smoke, pressing at my legs, my chest. The faces multiplied. Hundreds, or maybe it was just my mind fracturing under the weight of fear. Faces in the trees, mouths frozen in silent wails, eyes tracking every movement I made. I swallowed, dry throat burning. The weight of their attention was unbearable, pressing against my skin, inside my head, into my chest. A whisper came, low and sibilant, threading through the fog. "Why are you here?" My flashlight flickered. I spun, searching, and the faces twisted slightly, as if the question had been asked to me personally. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I'm a police officer," I said, voice trembling, almost a plea. "I'm just checking." The words died in my throat. The whisper came again, closer, more insistent, overlapping with another voice and another. Names I didn't recognize, overlapping with mine, calling me out, echoing, layering, pressing into my thoughts. The faces moved now, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Branches bent unnaturally, faces tilting, watching, leaning in. I felt panic rising, a raw, visceral panic I couldn't control. I turned, trying to back away, trying to put distance between me and the trees. My boots slipped in the wet leaves, fog curling around my ankles. Every shadow seemed to stretch, reaching, twisting in impossible directions. More faces appeared in the darkness, pale eyes glinting, mouths frozen in that silent, twisted scream. I tripped over a root, hands scraping wet earth, and the whispers surged. "You can't leave!" I bolted. Not a controlled step, but a panicked run, blindly following the path, flashlight beam cutting narrow arcs through the fog. The trees seemed to close in around me. Branches reached, scratching my arms, tugging at my uniform, but no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape. The faces multiplied, surrounding me in the periphery, twisting in impossible ways, appearing in trunks, in knots, in the fog itself. I stumbled to a stop, chest heaving, vision blurred. My flashlight flickered violently, and in that split second of darkness, I felt it. Something brushing past me. Not a shadow, not a branch. Something solid, pressing, close, impossibly close. I spun. Nothing. Only fog, only trees, only the twisted, pale faces, more numerous than before, some just at the edge of perception. I dropped to my knees, hands gripping the flashlight, shaking, trying to regain control. I whispered to myself, "It's just my mind. It's just exhaustion. It's just stress." But the words felt hollow. The awareness pressed in, silent but undeniable. The faces were alive in some way I couldn't understand, aware of me, responding to me, measuring fear, measuring attention, marking intrusion, a voice, a single deliberate voice cut through the layered whispers. My name, clear, sharp, insistent. "Officer!" I looked around, flashlight beam shaking. The fog thickened further. curling tightly around me, obscuring the path back, obscuring reality itself. The faces leaned closer, stretching in impossible ways, reaching down from the branches, tilting, twisting. I could feel their gaze in my bones pressing from every direction, a weight I couldn't lift. Panic overtook reason. I scrambled to my feet, running blindly, tripping, skidding, the wet leaves and roots tearing at my boots. Every time I glanced back, the faces multiplied, now in trunks, in branches, in the fog itself. They were everywhere, watching, judging, waiting. I screamed, a raw, hoarse sound that seemed swallowed immediately by the fog. Branches snagged my uniform, scraping my arms and face. I yelped, tore free, running faster. But the park seemed endless, the fog a living entity that bent space around me. The faces shifted as I ran, always just behind, just above, just beyond sight. My heart thundered, my lungs burned, my mind screamed for escape. Finally, I reached the edge of the park, the faint glow of streetlights ahead. The fog thinned slightly, though the presence didn't leave. The faces were still there, lingering in the shadows, watching, their awareness pressing from the periphery. I bolted through the gate, slammed the patrol car door, locked it, and collapsed inside, gasping, drenched in sweat and fear. Even as I drove away, I felt it, the lingering pressure, the weight of those twisted, pale faces in the trees. The whispers continued, layered in memory, pressing against thought. My pulse remained elevated, my hands trembling on the wheel. I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, of being marked, of being targeted. Back at the station, I filed a report, trying to rationalize. Fog, exhaustion, stress, imagination. But deep down, I knew better. Those faces weren't figments. They were aware. They remembered. And they waited. I won't go back. Not tonight. Not alone. But part of me knows that I will. Drawn, compelled, haunted. Because the park, the fog, the faces in the trees, they are alive in ways we cannot understand. And they know my name. They remember me. I just hope next time I can make it out alive. The radio crackled just as I was finishing my third lap through the streets that bordered the park. Static first, then a voice. Faint, almost too soft to make sense of. A child screaming. I froze, hand tightening on the steering wheel. The words were garbled, but the sound was unmistakable. A scream, piercing, full of terror. I called it in immediately. Dispatch, I'm picking up a child's scream near the East Park. I'm responding. My voice was steady, but my stomach twisted. That scream, it wasn't just a noise. It carried panic, desperation, a weight that pressed against my chest. The streets were empty, silent except for the hum of my engine and the occasional drip of water from streetlights. Fog clung to the ground, curling between street lamps and over the cracked pavement like it had a life of its own. I turned toward the park, headlights cutting through the mist, scanning for anything out of place. When I arrived, the gates were locked, as always, chains sagging under rust. The playground loomed beyond, shadows stretching across the wet grass, jungle gyms twisted in broken metal. I stepped out cautiously, flashlight slicing through the fog. The swings moved slightly, creaking softly, but there was no wind, no one, just silence. And then I heard it again, a child screaming coming from the slide. My heart jumped. It was closer this time, sharper, more real. I ran toward the playground, flashlight beam shaking with my hands. Hello? Hey, are you okay? My voice sounded small, swallowed immediately by the fog. The slide was empty, rusted, wet, silent. My breath came fast, short gasps, heart hammering. I shone my flashlight across the swings, the jungle gym, the overgrown paths. Nothing moved, no one. Just the fog curling over everything, thick and suffocating. Then the scream came again, louder, behind me. I spun, flashlight sweeping. Empty street, no child. Only fog, only shadows. A sense of dread pressed in, crawling along my spine, my legs, my chest. My mind raced. Was I hearing things? Exhaustion? Stress? Repetition of what I had seen before in the park? I stepped back, uneasy, trying to rationalize. But deep down, I knew this wasn't imagination. Not entirely. The sound carried weight, texture, intention. Panic, terror, even understanding. It was calling out. Calling me. I walked slowly toward the slide again, careful, flashlight cutting arcs in the fog. My boots sank slightly in the wet grass. The swing swayed gently. The jungle gym loomed, rusted metal glinting. Everything seemed ordinary, mundane, but nothing about the sound I had heard was ordinary. It had been real. I could feel it, vibrating through my bones, reverberating in my chest. Another scream, closer, immediate, behind me this time. I whipped around. Nothing. My flashlight caught on something small in the grass. A doll. Cracked porcelain, mud-stained, missing one eye. I recognized it from before, the toys, the markers, the reminders. The fog thickened further, curling around my legs, pressing against me. The scream changed, now a whisper layered beneath itself. Names. My name. My badge number. Commands. Pleas. Accusations. I stumbled, heart pounding, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. I tried to call out, to locate the sound. Where are you? Show yourself! My voice was weak, swallowed by the mist. The slide loomed ahead, rusted, empty. My flashlight flickered, and then I thought I saw something. A movement, a shadow, at the top of the slide. Pale, thin, small. A child, or something like one. I ran forward, but my boots slipped, and the fog seemed to thicken, curling tighter around me, slowing my steps. I reached the slide. Nothing, no child. Just metal wet with dew. My chest heaved. My hands shook. I wanted to call it in, to radio dispatch, to find help, but my voice faltered. The fear had a weight that made thought nearly impossible. The scream came again, this time directly above me. Though there was nothing there, I looked up the slide over the jungle gym into the fog. Eyes, a shape. Shadows moving in ways shadows shouldn't move. I backed up instinctively, breathing ragged, heart hammering like it wanted to escape my chest. Then a voice, soft, deliberate, and unmistakable. You shouldn't have come back, I froze. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave, but my legs refused. I felt a weight pressing on my shoulders, on my chest, on my head. The fog wasn't just around me. It was inside me, filling my lungs, crawling in my mind. The voices layered, whispers turning to laughter, then crying, then screaming again. I stumbled, gripping the wet metal of the slide for balance. The fog swirled, twisting around me, revealing fleeting glimpses of shapes. Faces in the mist, shadows of children, eyes that didn't blink, mouths frozen in silent screams. I could feel their awareness, their focus on me, their judgment. Another scream, louder, closer, but still unseen. I spun, flashlight beam shaking. The swings rattled, toys shifted slightly in the grass. The slide gleamed wetly, edges sharp and unnatural. My chest burned, breath shallow. Panic clawed at me. I wanted to leave. I had to leave. But something kept me rooted, drawn, held by fear, curiosity, and an unexplainable pull. The fog shifted. A figure appeared at the top of the slide. Small, pale, eyes dark, expression blank but aware. I called out, voice shaking. It's okay! I'm here! Don't be afraid! But the figure didn't move, didn't respond, just watched. Then, slowly, it dissolved into the mist. I stumbled back, tripping over roots, the fog thickening around me, pressing, curling, confining. The scream continued, echoing from every direction. I shouted into the mist, my voice cracking. Where are you? Silence answered. Then the whispers returned, layered, overlapping, speaking my name, my rank, fragments of memory. Commands, accusations, warnings. I ran blindly, following instinct, trying to escape. But the fog warped the path, twisted space, making the playground stretch unnaturally. Swings moved on their own, toys shifted, shadows lurked just beyond the flashlight beam. Faces appeared in the fog, twisted, pale, small, watching, waiting, judging. I reached the edge of the park, gasping, drenched in sweat, heart hammering. The fog thinned slightly, and I could see the streetlights ahead. But even there, the awareness lingered. The scream echoed faintly. A memory of sound pressed into my mind. I stumbled to the patrol car, sliding in, locking the doors. Even driving away, the sense of being watched persisted. The fog clung in memory, curling through my thoughts. Names whispered in the shadows, commands, cries, and accusations, layered over the screech of brakes and the hum of the engine. I couldn't shake the feeling of being marked, of being chosen, of having crossed some line I didn't understand. At the station, I filed a report, trying to rationalize. Stress, exhaustion, imagination. But every fiber of my being told me otherwise. The scream, the slide, the fog, the figures, real or not, they had targeted me, and they would again. That night, in my apartment, I couldn't sleep. I heard whispers just beyond the threshold of sound, shadows moving in peripheral vision, toys in storage that weren't there before, each one a reminder. I turned on every light, tried to rationalize, tried to ground myself. But deep down I knew the truth. I had heard the last call. I had answered. And whatever it was, whatever lingered in that fog, in that park, in the shadows between toys and slides and trees, it wasn't done with me. It remembered my name. It knew me. And one day it would call again. I don't know if I'll be ready. The call came just after dawn. A routine check, or at least that's what I told myself as I drove down the narrow forest road toward the cabin. Remote, isolated, the kind of place where cell signals die and the world outside stops existing. It wasn't supposed to be anything more than a paperwork case. Old hikers gone missing years ago, unresolved, cold. But I could feel that tug in my chest, the one that whispers to stay alert, to watch, to expect the unexpected. The forest closed in the moment I left the main road. Tall pines, their trunks blackened and slick from rain, leaned over the path, needles dripping with moisture. Fog lingered low to the ground, curling along roots and rocks like it had a life of its own. The cabin appeared after a bend, squat and weathered, wood gray with age, windows dark, doors shut tight. It was quiet in a way that made my stomach twist, too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I parked and stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The air smelled of pine and decay, old moss, damp leaves, and something metallic just faintly underneath, the hint of rust or blood I couldn't place. I raised my flashlight, even though the morning light was strong enough to see by, and made my way to the cabin. The door was locked, old padlock rusted but intact. I circled the building, scanning the perimeter. Nothing out of place, at least nothing immediately visible. Branches scraped lightly against the siding as the wind stirred, but that was it. Yet the hairs on my neck stood prickling. Something about the stillness pressed on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling I wasn't alone. I checked the windows, wiping condensation away with my sleeve. Inside, the cabin was dark. Dust hung in the air like a fine mist. Furniture overturned, dishes cracked on the floor. The remnants of human presence decayed into abandonment. And then I noticed them, scraps of clothing, small and torn, the remnants of backpacks, a boot lying on its side. Evidence left behind, but no person to claim it. The same way hikers disappear in the forest. One step too far, one misjudged path, and you're gone. I moved carefully, flashlight beam cutting arcs across the interior. Every floorboard groaned beneath my boots. The cabin felt like it was breathing. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting unnaturally as if they had their own life. I told myself it was the light, the angles, my imagination, but every instinct screamed otherwise. A journal lay open on a small table, pages yellowed, edges curled with age. I picked it up carefully. Reading entries written hastily, some scratched through, some pages missing entirely. Names, dates, locations, fragments of someone's attempt to record their days in this forest. The entries ended abruptly, one day mid-sentence. We thought we saw, and then nothing. I swallowed, a chill crawling up my spine. Someone had been here, had tried to leave a record, and had vanished anyway. I set the journal down and moved toward the back of the cabin. A small door led to a cellar. I hesitated. The air wafting from it was colder, heavier, smelled of damp stone and something I couldn't name. I descended slowly, each step groaning beneath me. The light barely reached the bottom and my breath fogged the air, hanging thickly like a curtain. Boxes and debris were stacked haphazardly. Footprints in the dust, small, human, and fresh enough to make my blood run cold. They didn't make sense, though. Years-old missing hikers leaving footprints now? Impossible. Yet there they were, leading toward the far wall. I followed them, heart hammering, breath short. The far wall had a small hatch, barely noticeable. I crouched to examine it. Scratch marks surrounded the edges, as if someone or something had tried repeatedly to open it from the inside. My stomach churned. Whoever, or whatever, had been here had left behind fragments, traces of panic, fear, desperation. And it had vanished. I stepped back, trying to steady my nerves. The forest outside seemed to press against the cabin walls, wind shifting, leaves rustling. I could almost hear whispers, faint, carried by the draft. Names, maybe, please, or was it my mind? I shook my head. Focus. Document. Report. Don't let fear take over. I examined the footprints again. They ended abruptly at the hatch. No trail out, no sign of escape, only silence. I felt the weight of the forest pressing in on me, its patience, its waiting. Every instinct screamed to leave, but I needed to understand, to see, to know. I decided to step outside, back into the gray morning. The fog seemed thicker now, swirling at the edges of the clearing. I paused, scanning the tree line. Shadows moved just beyond vision, twisting, bending, not quite human in shape. My pulse leapt. I couldn't see them clearly, but I could feel them. Watching. Waiting. The hikers, or the remnants of them, were not simply gone. Something had claimed this place, something patient and aware. I took notes, documenting everything, the cabin, the journal, the footprints, the feeling. But even as I wrote, I could feel it pressing. The awareness lingering in the clearing, in the fog, in the twisted branches overhead. I knew I wouldn't leave entirely unmarked. Not psychologically, not emotionally. As I packed up, I glanced back at the cabin. Windows dark, shadows curling at the corners. The journal still lay on the table as if waiting for me to forget it, or to bring it with me. I didn't know which was worse, the idea of leaving it behind or taking it with me. I left it. Let it rest there in the cabin with the echoes of the missing hikers. The road back was quiet. Too quiet. Fog trailed me, curling between the trees, pressing in on the edges of the patrol car. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see figures between the trunks, shadows stretching unnaturally. Nothing appeared, but the feeling persisted. Awareness. Watching. The forest had memory, patience, and it would wait. That night, back at the station, I tried to process everything. The case files, the journal excerpts, the footprints, rational explanations, I reminded myself. Stray hikers, animals, decomposition, confusion over years. But I couldn't shake the cold pressing in my chest, the feeling of eyes tracking me in the dark, of something aware beyond the cabin walls. The thought that the hikers didn't just vanish. They were still here in some form, lingering, waiting, and maybe calling attention to anyone who entered their forest. Sleep came fitfully. Dreams of dark trees, twisted branches, faint footprints, whispers in the fog. A weight pressed against my chest as though someone or something was lying atop me, waiting. And I knew deep down that I would return. Not because it was my duty, not because it was rational, but because that forest, that cabin, that weight of presence would pull at me again. I didn't know if I was ready. I didn't know if anyone ever could be. The forest had changed since my last visit. The fog was thicker this time, clinging to every branch and root like it was alive. Even the sunlight, pale and struggling through the canopy, seemed to hesitate before touching the ground. I parked my patrol car on the narrow dirt path and stepped out, boots sinking slightly in the wet earth. Every sound, the wind, the drip of water from leaves, the distant call of a bird, felt amplified, as if the forest itself were listening. I approached the cabin cautiously. The structure loomed like a relic, gray wood blackened by age and rain, windows dark. But something was different. Signs of movement. Fresh footprints in the mud leading to the front door, and a small pile of branches and leaves shifted as if recently disturbed. My pulse jumped. Someone, or something, had been here since I last came. I checked the perimeter slowly, flashlight sweeping over the ground, through the underbrush. I saw a broken branch near the back, splintered recently, and faint drag marks through the dirt. My stomach twisted. It didn't take imagination to know what had left them. Human, possibly alive. But for some reason I couldn't bring myself to believe it. The forest had a way of distorting perception, of turning shadows into shapes, shapes into presences. The front door was locked, rusted padlock intact. I circled the cabin, flashlight beam cutting through the fog, checking for another entry. The side window was cracked, slivers of glass missing. I crouched, peering inside. Dust motes floated in the beam, catching light like tiny stars. But the interior was darker than memory. I couldn't see much, only shapes. The remains of furniture, overturned and scattered debris. But then I heard it, a faint noise. From inside, I froze, listening. Footsteps, or the shift of something heavier? A door creak? I strained my ears, heart hammering, pulse echoing in my head. The cabin was supposed to be abandoned. Cold case? Years-old missing hikers? Nothing alive should be here. And yet the sound persisted, subtle but deliberate. Someone was inside. I tried the door cautiously, rattling the lock. It didn't budge. The noises inside stopped immediately, like they had been waiting for me to test it. My mind raced. Maybe it was an animal, a stray bear or raccoon that had taken shelter. But the pattern of movement, the timing, it was intentional, aware, watching, responding. I checked the windows again, flashlight beam sweeping. Shadows moved across the walls, though no wind should have been strong enough to shift them like that. I crouched closer, breath shallow. The air was damp, heavy, carrying an odor faint and metallic, almost like blood or rust. My stomach turned. I could feel the weight pressing from inside, the awareness of something just beyond vision, just beyond reach. A low thump echoed inside, unmistakable. I flinched. My flashlight flickered as if in response, making the shadows dance unnaturally. I whispered to myself, it's nothing. Just imagination, just stress, focus. But my own words rang hollow. I could feel it, eyes watching me from within, tracking, patient, measuring. I circled the cabin, checking for another entry. The back door had been forced slightly, hinges bent but still closed. Drag marks led toward the cellar hatch at the side. I crouched again, trying to peer down into the dark opening. The air wafting up smelled heavier, colder, carrying a hint of rot. My heart pounded. Whoever or whatever had been here had left signs. They were still inside, or they had been very recently. Another sound. A soft scraping. Metal against wood. I froze, every muscle tense, flashlight trembling in my hand. I could hear my own pulse in my ears, pounding, echoing against the stillness of the forest. The cabin was alive in a way it shouldn't be, breathing, shifting, aware. Shadows stretched across the walls like reaching fingers, bending at angles that made no sense. I whispered aloud, hoping for reassurance. Hello? Anyone here? Silence. Then a thump, louder this time from the floor above. My stomach lurched. The cabin had a second story I hadn't explored before. The idea of climbing those stairs, of stepping into the unknown, made every hair on my body stand on end. And yet something compelled me forward. Duty? Curiosity? Fear? All of it. I gripped my flashlight like a weapon, flashlight beam cutting across the cracked wooden steps, and ascended slowly. The floorboards groaned underfoot, each creak magnified in the silence. Dust rose in tiny clouds with each step. The air grew colder, thicker, pressing against my chest. I reached the top and froze. The room at the end of the hall was dark, but I could see signs of recent activity. Footprints in dust, as if someone had walked carefully, deliberately. Items shifted slightly, not quite in place. Something had been here, and it had watched me approach. Another noise. From inside the room, I inched forward, flashlight beam sweeping, revealing overturned furniture, a chair tipped on its side. And then I heard it clearly. A whisper, deliberate, soft, and unmistakable. Go, my pulse jumped. The voice wasn't human, not entirely. It carried weight, intention, awareness. I stepped back instinctively, heart racing, mind screaming at me to leave. But I couldn't. Something drew me closer. The footprints led deeper into the room, toward a small door at the far wall. The door was locked, old but worn from use, and I could see faint scratches around the edges. Whoever or whatever had used it had done so recently. I pressed my ear against the door. Breathing, movement, Nothing humanly recognizable, only silence, thick, pressing, almost alive. I could feel the weight of awareness behind it, pressing, waiting. My mind raced. Could it be one of the hikers? Alive? Lost in the forest all these years? Or something else? Something that had claimed this cabin, claimed the forest, claimed the people who wandered too far. I stepped back, shivering. The air felt heavy, suffocating, filled with the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic. My flashlight flickered again, shadows dancing across the walls. Every instinct screamed to leave, to call it in, to get out before curiosity became a mistake I couldn't undo. Then a sudden noise, soft, deliberate, like a footstep against the floor just behind me. I spun, flashlight sweeping, but nothing. The door remained closed, still, impenetrable. I could feel eyes, awareness, pressing, patient, observing my every movement. My pulse thundered, my breath shallow. I whispered to myself, "It's just the forest. It's just stress. It's just a case." But the words felt hollow, meaningless against the weight pressing in. I realized then that I wasn't alone. Not in the way the forest normally held life. Not a deer, not a bird. Something else. Watching, waiting, testing, measuring fear. And maybe hunger, not for food, but for attention, for acknowledgement, for intrusion into its space. I backed away from the door slowly, documenting everything in my mind, recording every detail in my notebook for the report I knew I would file later. But even as I moved, I could feel the awareness follow me, pressing, circling, patient. The fog outside the cabin seemed to pulse in tandem with it, curling through the trees, through the cracks in the walls, through the air itself. I stepped outside, gulping cold, damp air. The forest pressed around me, heavy and alive, the fog curling between trees, twisting around trunks, thick and almost sentient. I looked back at the cabin. Windows dark, door locked, shadows shifting within, just out of reach, just out of understanding. Even as I drove away, the sensation remained. The cabin, the forest, the locked door. It had watched me, remembered me, marked me, and I knew deep down that I would return. Not because it was rational, not because it was necessary, but because it had claimed a part of me. Curiosity, fear, dread. It had hooked me, tethered me, waiting. I don't know what I would find if I returned. A hiker? The echoes of the past? Or something else entirely? Patient, aware, and waiting behind that locked door. The forest seemed darker this time, heavier, as if it had grown impatient while I was away. Fog curled around the base of the trees, clinging to my boots as I approached the cabin once again. The memory of the locked door, the whispers, the footprints, everything pressed against my chest, a weight I couldn't shake. I should have stayed away, but something drew me back, a compulsion I didn't understand. I parked on the narrow dirt path and stepped out, the cold air cutting through my jacket. The cabin sat like a carcass in the clearing, still weathered, silent. But this time, I noticed details I hadn't before. The bark pressed into the window frame, smudges in the dust on the sill, faint streaks running down the wood. Signs of recent disturbance. Someone or something had been here since I left. The padlock on the door was the same, rusted but intact. I circled the building slowly, flashlight beams sweeping over the ground, scanning for footprints, marks, anything that would tell me what I was dealing with. And then I saw them, scratches. Long, deep, claw-like marks gouged into the siding, some almost reaching the window frame. They were fresh. My stomach lurched. Whoever, or whatever, had made these marks had been trying to get in. Or out. I stepped closer to examine them. The wood splintered beneath my fingertips. Some of the scratches were stained dark. Blood, I realized, though it was dry and caked. My pulse leapt and my hands trembled, gripping the flashlight tightly. The forest pressed in around me, fog curling through the branches, pressing against the cabin walls like it had awareness. Inside, the air was thick, musty, with the scent of damp wood and decay. Dust hung in the light, motes dancing in the beam like tiny motes of memory, remnants of lives disrupted, vanished. I stepped cautiously, floorboards creaking beneath my boots. The scratches continued inside, deep into the wood paneling. walls gouged as if someone, or something, had clawed at the structure for escape, for freedom, for attention. Bloodstains spattered across the wall near the cellar hatch. I froze, stomach churning, flashlight shaking. The red streaks had dried but were unmistakable, dark against the gray wood. My mind screamed at me to leave, to retreat, but some part of me compelled forward. Duty? Curiosity? Fear? I couldn't tell anymore. The cellar hatch loomed ahead, small, dark, foreboding. The scratches continued down the steps. They were paired with faint drag marks, uneven, frantic, telling a story of panic, struggle, and terror. I swallowed hard, heart hammering, as I descended slowly, flashlight cutting through the heavy darkness. Every step groaned beneath me, echoing in the silence. The air grew colder, thicker, like it wanted to push back against me. My breath fogged in front of my face, mingling with the dust, the scent of iron and rot pressing at my senses. The scratches on the walls became more frequent, clawed deeply into the wood. Blood stains smeared across corners, dripped into small puddles on the floorboards. My stomach turned, but I forced myself forward, compelled to understand. Something shifted in the darkness. A faint movement at the edge of the flashlight beam, too fast, too deliberate to be my mind playing tricks. I froze, flashlight illuminating a wall where the scratches ended abruptly. I could hear it then, a soft scraping, subtle, deliberate, as if claws had just withdrawn. My chest tightened, fear rising in waves I could barely contain. The cellar seemed alive, not just with the memory of past hikers, but with awareness. Something pressed against me, patient, watching, measuring. I swallowed, trying to calm my racing heart. Footsteps? Or just the creak of old wood? The smell of iron, thick now, filled my nostrils. Something had been here recently, very recently, and I had walked straight into its presence. I moved deeper, flashlight trembling in my hand. The scratches twisted unnaturally along the walls, bending around corners leading to a far wall I hadn't noticed before. There the marks converged around a small hole, gouged roughly, splintered, deep. I crouched, shining the light inside. Darkness. But the darkness felt solid, aware, pressing, waiting. A whisper came from the hole, low, sibilant, deliberate. Not words I could understand, but intention unmistakable. I swallowed, heart hammering, trying to rationalize. Stress, exhaustion, imagination. But even as I thought it, the claw marks seemed to shift subtly in the beam. As if aware of me, responding, I stepped back. Suddenly aware of the walls pressing in, the air heavy, each breath thick and wet with the scent of iron. The scratches were everywhere now, or maybe I just noticed them, finally seeing the pattern I had missed. Long lines gouged into the wood, spiraling, chaotic, deliberate, each one a message, a warning, a record of terror. I traced one with my finger, careful not to touch the dried blood. It was jagged, frantic, angry, full of fear, pain, desperation. The scratching started again, higher up above me this time, followed by a low thump. I whipped my flashlight toward the ceiling. Shadows twisted unnaturally across beams and joists. Something was moving, but not like a person. Not human! And I realized with cold certainty I was being watched. Not just by the airless dark, not just by memory or imagination, but by awareness, deliberate, patient, waiting. A soft, deliberate scraping moved across the floor above me. Then another, closer. I froze, heartbeat in my throat. My flashlight illuminated a wall across the cellar, and I saw something, a shape shifting just at the edge of perception. Claw-like hands? Shadows? Something breathing? I couldn't tell. I could only feel it pressing against my skin, my chest, my mind. I stepped back, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to reason. There had to be an explanation. Animals trapped, previous hikers returning, wind and wood making sounds. But none of it fit. The scratches told a story, a record of presence, of struggle, of horror. And whatever had left them, whatever pressed awareness against me, had not left willingly. The whispers rose slightly, layered now, overlapping, almost voices of the missing hikers, or maybe my imagination. Why are you here? One seemed to ask. You shouldn't be, another added. Names, or fragments of them, echoed faintly like memory pressed into the air. My chest tightened, panic rising. I stumbled backward, boots scraping the floor, flashlight wobbling. My hands shook violently. Every instinct screamed to leave, to abandon reason, to run, but I couldn't. The scratches called to me, compelled me, drew me deeper, demanding acknowledgement. I tried to step toward the stairs, toward the light above, toward safety. But the shadows stretched along the walls, reaching, twisting, responding to my movement. The air was thick with menace now, dense, almost tangible, pressing on my lungs. I realized I wasn't just in a cellar. I was inside awareness itself. Inside the space of memory, struggle, and terror, held by something patient and alive. I swallowed hard, shaking, and forced myself to take a few steps back. The scratches seemed to pulse in the flashlight beam, long lines turning into spirals, jagged streaks into impossible patterns. Every mark a message, a record of the unseen presence that had claimed this cabin, this cellar, this forest. Another thump, deliberate above me, and a whisper I could just barely make out. Stay. I froze. Pulse hammering, sweat beading on my forehead. I could feel its awareness pressing from every direction. Shadows twisted unnaturally. Claw marks seemed to deepen before my eyes, as if feeding on fear, on acknowledgement. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. I backed toward the stairs slowly, flashlight beam cutting wide arcs, documenting, noting, trying to ground myself in reality. The weight pressed relentlessly. And then suddenly silence. Thick, heavy, absolute. The air hung in the cellar like a held breath. The scratches, the blood, the clawed marks, all remained, silent, waiting, patient. I didn't linger. I climbed the stairs, heart hammering, breath shaking. The forest outside was foggy, quiet, alive in a way I didn't understand. The cabin stood silently, still, patient, its walls bearing the memory of struggle, fear, and presence. I left as quickly as I could, the sense of being watched following me, pressing against my back, my shoulders, my thoughts. Even now, hours later, sitting in the patrol car and trying to process, I feel it, the awareness, patient, waiting, alive. The scratches are more than marks in wood. They are warnings, messages, memories pressed into the air by something deliberate. And I know deep down that I haven't seen the last of it. Not yet. The forest had a weight to it I hadn't felt before. The fog clung to the underbrush, swirling around my boots like it had substance, like it could reach out and grip me. Each step on the wet earth seemed to echo, though the forest should have swallowed every sound. The trees loomed overhead, black and silent, their twisted branches forming shapes that seemed to watch, waiting. I followed the narrow trail to the clearing near the cabin. My flashlight cut through the mist, its beam weak against the thick gray that pressed in from every direction. I should have felt relief returning to a familiar place, but the cabin didn't bring comfort. It brought questions. Questions I didn't have answers for, and the answers I did have seemed worse than ignorance. Footprints trailed along the path, fresh in the damp soil. Small, human, and impossible. Years-old missing hikers shouldn't leave footprints now, and yet here they were, imprinted in the mud, leading deeper into the trees, toward the thickest fog. I hesitated, chest tightening. My instincts screamed to turn back, but the weight pressing at my mind urged me forward. Something was waiting. Something wanted me to see. I followed the prints cautiously, each step deliberate. The fog seemed to curl around me, thickening, swirling like smoke. Shapes moved in the periphery of my vision. Shadows, animals. My mind tried to rationalize, to explain away the rising panic, but deep down I knew better. This forest had memory. It had patience, and it had awareness. And then I saw them. Figures emerging from the fog, pale and motionless at first. Hiker apparitions. At least I thought they were human, but there was something wrong about them. Too still, too deliberate, faces blurred, expressions frozen between fear and despair. They drifted along the path like ghosts, stepping through mist, leaving no disturbance in the leaves, no sound in the forest. My pulse leapt, breath caught in my chest. I froze. They stopped too, just short of the path I walked, their hollow eyes, if they were eyes, fixed on me. I could see no mouth, no movement, but I felt their gaze, patient, cold, accusatory. They were not alive, yet not gone. They were echoes of those lost, remnants of terror, memories pressed into the forest. My fingers trembled around my flashlight. I took a careful step back, trying to convince myself I was hallucinating. Fatigue, stress, the isolation of the forest. It had to be. But the figures mirrored me, each step I took matched by them, drifting closer through the fog, impossibly quiet. My pulse thundered in my ears, adrenaline surging. But curiosity, something darker, more compelling, held me in place. I tried to speak. What are you? My voice sounded small, swallowed by the fog. No reply, only movement. A hand, or something like a hand, rose from one of the figures, skeletal, pale, reaching toward me. I flinched, flashlight beam wobbling, illuminating nothing but mist. My mind raced, trying to reconcile what I saw with what I knew. Missing hikers, cold cases, the scratches in the cabin walls, blood stains, footprints in mud, and now this. These figures weren't alive. They were reminders, warnings, or worse. They were part of the forest, of the cabin, of the waiting presence I had felt since I first entered. I stepped backward, heart hammering, trying to put distance between me and the apparitions. The fog thickened, curling around my legs, gripping, pressing. Shapes shifted in the mist. More figures appearing, some partially formed, some only suggestion of movement. They surrounded me slowly, silently. I realized then that the footprints I had followed weren't leading anywhere. They were leading me into them, into the fog, into the waiting, a whisper. Barely audible, drifted through the air. Names, partial names, fragments of sentences. Help! Don't go! Why? My stomach churned. The voices weren't human, yet they were intelligible, pressing on my ears, on my mind. They were memories, echoes of fear and desperation, anchored to the forest, to the cabin, to the presence that haunted it. I tried to rationalize. They were hallucinations, induced by stress, isolation, exhaustion. I forced myself to breathe deeply, to step backward, to leave the fog behind. But the forest had changed. The path I had followed was gone, replaced by gray mist curling in impossible angles. My flashlight illuminated nothing but swirling fog and shadows that didn't belong to any tree or rock. One of the apparitions drifted closer, pale face indistinct, eyes hollow. I could see the scratches from the cabin on its arms, the smears of dried blood on its hands. It raised a hand toward me again. I stumbled backward into a tree trunk. Pain shot through my shoulder, grounding me momentarily in reality. But the fog was patient, waiting, and the figure paused only briefly before continuing its drift, following my movements, mirroring, always just beyond reach. I could hear my own voice in my head now, arguing, pleading. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. But the evidence around me screamed otherwise. Footprints, blood, claw marks, the locked door, the whispers. Every step into the fog felt like a step into memory itself, into the terror of the lost, into the presence that had claimed the cabin and the forest. I stumbled over a root, catching myself just before falling. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles, rising to my knees, then waist. Shapes multiplied. Apparitions appeared from every direction, faces blurred, bodies twisted unnaturally. Some reached toward me, some drifted past, leaving no disturbance, no sound. And in their stillness, I could feel judgment, awareness, patience. I was intruding. I was being observed. I was a part of the forest's memory now. I forced myself to move, step by step, toward what I hoped was the edge of the fog, the edge of the forest, toward sanity. But the trail I had followed earlier was gone. Trees twisted impossibly, paths looping back on themselves. I realized with a cold dread that I could not leave. Not yet. The forest, the fog, the echoes, they had me. And they would not let go. A voice whispered close to my ear, soft, deliberate. My own name. You shouldn't be here. I spun, flashlight illuminating nothing but swirling mist. The apparitions drifted closer, circling, patient, aware. The sound of breathing, faint but deliberate, pressed against my skull. I could feel it behind me, in front, beside. Awareness, observation, judgment. Panic clawed at my chest, but I forced myself to slow my breathing, to think, to reason. This was the forest, yes, but it was also memory, absence, presence. These were the lost hikers, or what remained of them, the traces of despair left imprinted in time. And yet, some part of me doubted my own senses. I couldn't trust what I saw, couldn't trust what I heard, couldn't trust my own mind. I stumbled backward, branches scratching my arms, fog wrapping around me, pressing, suffocating. Apparitions mirrored me, drifting closer with each step. I wanted to scream, to run, to leave, but the forest had twisted into something unrecognizable. Reality blurred. Memory and present collided. The scratches in the cabin walls, the blood stains, the footprints, they all pointed to one conclusion I didn't want to admit. Something waited, patient, aware, persistent, and it had drawn me into its space, its memory, its echo. I tried to retrace my steps. Step after step, I found nothing familiar. Trees bent impossibly, shadows stretched unnaturally. Fog rose in columns, swirling, thickening, hiding everything. I questioned myself. Had I been here before? Had I seen this path? Or had the forest changed around me, reshaped by the weight of absence and fear? The apparitions drifted closer, more deliberate now. Faces pale, blurred, frozen between fear and accusation. Names whispered from the fog. "Why are you here?" one asked. Another, "You shouldn't have come." And then I realized, with a shiver of terror, that the whispers were not only voices, they were thoughts pressed into my mind, intruding, invasive, deliberate. I stopped. My pulse thundered, my breathing ragged. I could feel their awareness pressing against me from all sides. Shapes shifted in the fog, closer, impossibly close, but still intangible. I was trapped in memory, in presence, in something that had been patient for years, decades maybe, waiting for intrusion, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for me. I backed against a tree, flashlight beam sweeping. The figures drifted, circling slowly, deliberately. No sound but whispers, no motion but the pressure of attention. I questioned my sanity. Was this real? Was it hallucination, exhaustion, isolation? My journal entries, the scratches, the blood, the footprints all said yes. Reality was a fluid thing here, bending around memory, around absence, around presence. And I was losing my grip. A hand reached toward me, pale, twisted, clawed. Not solid, not flesh, but awareness made form. I flinched, stumbled, and the fog seemed to thicken, pressing closer, filling my ears with whispers, with names, with judgment. I realized then that I was not leaving. Not yet. Not unless it let me. The forest, the fog, the echoes, they had claimed me, and maybe they had claimed everyone who came before me. The hikers, the cabin, the locked door, the scratches, they were all part of the same thing. Patient. Aware. Waiting. I stood frozen, heart hammering, breath shallow, eyes scanning the fog. The apparitions drifted closer, silent, deliberate. And for the first time, I didn't resist. I couldn't. I questioned everything, my senses, my mind, my sanity. And as I stared into the fog, the awareness pressing from all sides, I understood. The forest remembered. It watched, it waited, and now, so did I. I remember that night like a normal one at first. The kind of shift that should have been uneventful, just the usual routine beat through quiet streets. I left the station around 10, night already heavy, the air crisp and smelling faintly of rain that had passed earlier. Streetlights cast long, uneven shadows on the asphalt, illuminating empty sidewalks and shuttered houses. At first, it was exactly as I expected. Slow, quiet. The occasional car passing. A lone dog barking somewhere in the distance. I made my rounds, lights off, just the hum of the engine and my own thoughts for company. The radio squawked occasionally with minor calls, parking complaints, reports of a lost dog, but nothing serious. The night was ordinary, comforting almost if you liked silence. But then it started. Tiny disturbances, a flicker of movement at the edge of a yard, shadows that didn't match the shape of trees or fences. At first I convinced myself it was my imagination, tired eyes tricking me. My mind wanted routine, wanted normal, but the feeling didn't go away. It pressed against the back of my skull, insistent, a whisper I couldn't quite hear. I turned onto a narrow street, the kind that should have been empty. A swing in a yard moved slowly back and forth. No wind, No sound except the creak of the chains. I slowed, leaning on the steering wheel, flashlight off, radio silent. The swing stopped when I blinked. Just a trick of perspective, I told myself. A neighborhood kid playing a prank, maybe. But the hair on my neck prickled, and the air felt thicker. I kept driving, scanning the yards, the darkened houses. Every now and then, I caught movement at the corner of my eye. A shadow across a driveway, a figure that vanished when I looked directly. My stomach tightened. I told myself I was tired, eyes straining in the dim light, but still, my hand lingered on the radio button. Ready to call it in if anything crossed the line from odd to dangerous. Then I heard it. A noise from a side street. Footsteps? No, too deliberate, too heavy. I stopped the patrol car and listened, heart thumping. The street was narrow, flanked by old brick buildings, some vacant, some with dim lights behind drawn curtains. I flicked on the spotlight, sweeping the street. Nothing. Only shadows and fog curling along the asphalt. I eased forward, cautious. Every sense was alert now, eyes scanning every corner, ears straining for the slightest sound. Then a gate squeaked. Metal hinges, slow and deliberate. I swung the spotlight toward it. Empty yard. The gate had moved, yes, but no one there. My stomach churned, unease curling in my chest. Something was watching. Something that didn't belong. I radioed dispatch, keeping my voice calm, even as my pulse thudded. Nothing on the street. Gate moved, but no one there. No signs of disturbance. No reply beyond the usual static. I knew that. The act of reporting didn't soothe me. It just reminded me how alone I was out here, just me, the patrol car, and the night. I continued my beat. The streets twisted into quieter residential areas, empty except for the occasional flicker of light from a window. I passed a small park. The swings moved again. Slightly. Just a nudge this time. I slowed, leaning out the window, peering through the darkness. The fog was thicker here, hugging the ground, curling around the bases of the trees. I could see nothing, hear nothing, and yet the hair on my arms stood on end. The radio crackled, static. Then a faint voice, garbled, almost a whisper. Hello? I spun, flashlight sweeping. Empty street? Nothing. I tapped the mic, voice firm. Unit 12, go ahead. Silence, then static. I frowned. Probably interference. Equipment fault. Still, the feeling didn't leave me. That pressing weight at the back of my neck, like the night itself was aware I was there. I moved on. Just another block. Just another house. Routine. But the subtle disturbances kept coming. Shadows that didn't align. Creaking sounds from empty houses. The faint whisper of movement in the fog. My chest tightened. I could almost sense it. Some presence brushing against the edges of the night. Patient. Waiting. Not threatening, exactly, not yet, but present. Watching. Measuring. A small alley caught my attention. Dim light, trash bins knocked over as if recently disturbed. I checked it slowly. Flashlight cutting through the gloom. Nothing. Only a faint impression in the dirt. Like someone had walked through recently, footprints half erased by wind and mist. I knelt examining them. Human, yes, adult. But they didn't make sense. Too deep, too deliberate, as if someone was testing the ground, testing me. I stood, heart hammering. I radioed again. Nothing physical, just impressions. Moving along. Static. The response was delayed, clipped. Just me and the night, alone, but aware. Everything in me screamed that the small disturbances were not random, that they were deliberate, that they were growing, testing boundaries. I drove on. The streets narrowed, old brick buildings giving way to industrial lots. Fog thickened, pooling in the depressions of cracked asphalt. My headlights caught shapes in the mist. A figure, fleeting, moving across a lot. Human? Maybe, but there was something off. Too still, too slow. It vanished when I approached, leaving only the heavy weight in the air. I stopped the car, chest tight, flashlight in hand. My mind raced, trying to rationalize. Security guard? Trespasser? Drunken wanderer? Nothing fit. Nothing explained the pattern, the shadows, the noises, the impressions in the dirt, the way the fog seemed to shift around me. It wasn't chaos. It was deliberate, waiting, watching. A sound from behind me made me spin. My patrol car's rear tires creaked as I slammed the brake. Footsteps. Heavy. Not fast, not panicked, just deliberate. I shone the flashlight into the mist behind the car. Empty. Just fog. Just shadows. My hands shook, and I had to take a moment to breathe, to focus. I wasn't imagining it. I couldn't be. I radioed one last time before heading toward the main road. Unit 12, proceeding to next sector. Nothing tangible? My voice sounded small in the cabin of the car. The fog swirled outside, curling in and around the vehicle, pressing against the glass. I could feel it, the awareness of something there waiting. Not threatening, not overt, but patient, deliberate, undeniable. The rest of the night passed in a haze of minor disturbances, flickering shadows at the edge of streetlights. Doors that I swore were closed now ajar, faint noises I couldn't locate. Each time I stopped, each time I investigated, nothing tangible was there. And yet the weight pressed, heavy, insistent, waiting. By the time my shift ended, the feeling had not left me. I drove back to the station, fog still thick along the route, pressing against the car, curling in around headlights, curling in my mind. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something there, following, patient, watching. Nothing, only fog, only shadows. But I knew. I knew the disturbances were more than coincidence. Something had brushed against my patrol, testing, measuring, acknowledging my presence. Something that didn't belong. Something patient and deliberate. And I understood, in that quiet, tense, unnerving moment, that the night had memory. That it remembered me. That it would wait. I parked, stepped out of the car, fog curling around my boots. Still thick, still heavy. The streets were quiet, ordinary, safe, and yet nothing felt normal anymore. Every sound, every shadow, every reflection of light seemed to hold intent. I kept glancing over my shoulder as I walked inside, feeling the weight pressing behind me. The disturbances were minor, insignificant, but they weren't random. And I knew deep down that I hadn't seen the last of them. The night was patient, and it was aware the alley didn't look dangerous. Narrow, dimly lit, lined with brick walls, trash bins, the usual smells of refuse and damp asphalt. I had patrolled it before, many times, and nothing had ever happened. But that night something felt off. A weight, subtle but undeniable, pressed against the back of my neck as I drove past. I was responding to a call about suspicious activity. Residents had reported seeing someone lurking, following people as they walked home. Nothing serious yet, just an uneasy presence. I eased the patrol car down the alley, spotlight sweeping, engine low and steady, radio quiet. My eyes scanned every shadow, every corner, every doorway. At first, nothing. Just the usual. Faded graffiti, overflowing trash bins, the occasional cat darting between fences. I slowed, heart tightening, the instinctive feeling that someone or something was aware of me. And then I saw it. A figure at the far end of the alley, just inside a pool of light from a flickering street lamp. Dark, humanoid, indistinct, but unmistakably there. It moved just slightly when it saw me. Not fast, not running, just shifting, watching. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, hair standing on end. I radioed dispatch, voice steady. Unit 12 in alley, suspicious person reported. No movement yet, observing. Static crackled back, nothing more. Typical routine response. I drove closer, slowing to a crawl. The figure remained there, silent, shadowed, almost blending with the dark brick behind it. Every instinct screamed to approach cautiously, to stay alert, but also to maintain control, to keep the night from swallowing me whole. I cut the engine and watched. A pedestrian appeared at the far end of the alley. Young woman, coat pulled tight, umbrella half open against a mist that had begun to fall. The figure shifted, followed, not openly but subtly. Steps synchronized, distance maintained, silent, deliberate. My stomach knotted. Something about the way it moved, patient, almost rehearsed, made the hair on my arms stand on end. I left the car, flashlight in hand. I moved slowly down the alley, careful, deliberate, trying to appear unthreatening. "Evening," I called, voice low, firm. No response. The figure paused, not hiding, not advancing. Just standing, waiting, observing. I could feel awareness pressing from it. Not human exactly, not alive exactly, and yet undeniably present. I glanced at the pedestrian. She hadn't noticed. She moved unaware. I started forward, aiming to intercept without alarming her. Each step on the wet asphalt echoed unnaturally, swallowed by the fog curling along the alley. The figure mirrored me. Every step, every pause, synchronized in subtle, impossible ways. Closer now. I could see details, height roughly 6 feet, lean, movements deliberate but unnatural. The hood pulled low, face obscured. Shadows shifted across it, but I could feel the gaze, patient, measuring, calculating. I called again, voice firmer. "Sir, step into the light." Silence. Only stillness, only patience. The pedestrian turned a corner ahead, leaving the alley behind. The figure followed effortlessly, fluidly, vanishing into the fog and darkness. I felt the pressing awareness fade slightly, but not entirely. It had left, yes, but it had noticed me. And I just knew, that it would return. I moved forward cautiously, scanning every doorway, every darkened alcove. The alley was empty now, but my skin prickled. The air felt thicker, heavier. I could hear distant footsteps echoing oddly, but they weren't mine. Or maybe they were. I stopped, flashlight beam sweeping, empty, only shadows and fog. But awareness lingered, patient, deliberate. I radioed again, reporting nothing. No sign of the suspect. Pedestrian safe. Area clear. My voice sounded hollow. I wasn't entirely sure I had been reporting the correct thing. The figure, whatever it was, had been real. It had moved with intention, and yet there was nothing left to see. Nothing tangible except the sense of being watched, the unnatural patience, the impossible stillness. I walked the length of the alley slowly, checking corners, knocking on doors where residents might have seen something. No one answered. The fog thickened, pressing against my legs, curling around the base of buildings, clinging to the trash bins. Each step felt heavier, slower. The figure had vanished physically, but not psychologically. I could still feel it, patient, waiting, deliberate. I paused near a fire escape. Shadows pooled unnaturally along the brick walls, shifting in ways that didn't match the weak light overhead. My flashlight illuminated nothing, yet I felt the pressure again. Awareness, attention, watching. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. Fatigue, imagination, too many nights alone? But it wasn't imagination, not entirely. Something had been there, something deliberate, something patient. I continued to the far end, exiting the alley onto a main street. The fog thinned slightly, the streetlights stronger, normality creeping back. But the impression remained. Every step back toward my patrol car, I felt it, lingering in the shadows, in the edges of perception, patient, waiting, measuring. I climbed into the car, heart still racing, flashlight off. Engine low, radio quiet. I drove slowly along my route, scanning side streets, alleyways, parks. Nothing. Routine again. But routine felt wrong now. Every shadow, every figure moving in the distance, every flicker of light seemed imbued with intent. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. The rest of the night passed in minor disturbances. Trash bins knocked over. Shadows that didn't align. Lights flickering in abandoned buildings. Small things insignificant to anyone else. But to me, they were patterns, signs, warnings. The alley, the figure, the way it moved, waited, mirrored me. It was deliberate. And I understood, in that quiet tension, that the night had memory. That awareness lingered where it shouldn't. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted, tense, uneasy. I drove back to the station, fog thinning with the early hours. Routine was restored outwardly. Lights, sidewalks, empty streets, but inside me the weight pressed still. The figure, patient, deliberate, aware, had left an impression I couldn't erase. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see movement in the shadows, expecting awareness. Nothing. But the feeling persisted. That alley wasn't dangerous in a conventional sense. It didn't need to be. Something had touched it, imprinted on it, and it had touched me too. Minor disturbances, small hints. Yet they carried weight. Presence, awareness. And I just knew, that it wasn't done with me. That patience had a reach far beyond what I could see, and that night, routine had been broken. Not violently, not loudly, but quietly, insidiously. I parked at the station and stepped out of the car, fog curling along my boots, thin now but lingering. Normalcy seemed restored. Streets empty. Sidewalks silent. Lights steady. And yet something within me remained alert, tense, waiting. Awareness. Patient, deliberate, watching. Something had passed through the alley that night. Something had acknowledged me, and I understood, with a cold certainty, that it would return. I started noticing a pattern. The people who reported the figure in the alleys, the shadows, the minor disturbances, they changed. Slowly at first, almost imperceptibly, a shift in posture, a blankness behind their eyes, hesitation in their words, and sometimes they vanished entirely. Not just left town, not just missed a shift. They disappeared as if the world itself had swallowed them. It started with Mrs. Carver, an elderly woman who had called in about noises outside her apartment window. She had seemed nervous but rational, polite. I remember thinking she might be overreacting, old age maybe, nerves, but her fear was real. She insisted she had seen someone in the shadows, moving slowly, watching her. I nodded, took notes, reassured her that I'd patrol the area, all the usual things we say to calm residents. When I returned a week later, Mrs. Carver was gone. Not out shopping, not visiting family. The apartment was empty. Furniture dusted, drawers in place, nothing disturbed. I asked neighbors. They shrugged. She moved? I didn't see her leave. No one knew. And yet I remembered her face, the way she had clutched the railing, the way her eyes had widened in that helpless, desperate way. The memory felt more vivid than reality. Next was the young man at the convenience store, late at night, reporting the figure on his way home from a shift. I had gone to check, found nothing but the usual shadows and fog curling through the alleys. He thanked me, seemed relieved. But later that week, when I tried to follow up, the store clerk said he hadn't come in for days. Police records had no trace of him ever existing. Birth date, driver's license, phone number. Nothing. And yet I remembered his words, the way he had pointed down the alley, the fear in his voice. It made me question everything. My senses, my memory. Was I imagining patterns? Was this some kind of mass hysteria? Or had I stumbled into a psychological trap woven by fatigue and loneliness? I tried to tell myself that, rationalized. But the incidents kept stacking. Each report, each witness, left an imprint in my mind, and then they vanished or acted. Wrong, mechanical, uncaring, empty-eyed. One night, I spoke with a man who had seen the figure while jogging. He seemed fine at first, though tight-lipped. But as I pressed for details, I noticed something. He hesitated, then repeated phrases I had said in prior conversations with other witnesses. Not paraphrased, word for word, almost as if he were echoing my own thoughts, my own questions. The chill ran down my spine. I asked him to clarify. He blinked blankly, then laughed, low, humorless, unnatural. I don't know, he said. The words felt rehearsed, hollow. Later, he didn't come back to the neighborhood. No forwarding address. Phone disconnected. When I checked with neighbors, they had no recollection of him even existing. It was like he had been written into the world briefly, then erased. I could still see him in my mind. His gait, the way he had flinched at shadows, the echo of my own words leaving his lips. Memory versus reality blurred until I couldn't trust either. Even my own notes began to feel unsteady, unreliable. I would write down names, dates, descriptions of the figure or witnesses, and later find discrepancies. A name spelled differently. A date wrong. The sketch I had drawn looked slightly different than I remembered. Not completely wrong. Subtle, but enough to make me question my perception. Had the witnesses actually existed? Or was I fabricating them in the fatigue and isolation of night patrols? I started avoiding speaking with residents if I could. Avoided eye contact. Tried to focus on my route, on the routine. But everywhere I went, I could feel it. The figure, or the memory of it. And the vanished witnesses haunted me more than the figure itself. I remembered them in perfect detail, but reality refused to confirm them. It was maddening. I could almost see them standing at the edge of perception, half finished, waiting to exist again. I tried speaking to my partner about it. "I don't know," I said one night over the radio, trying to sound casual. "People see things, then vanish, or act wrong. It's probably fatigue, maybe stress." He listened quietly. "You're tired," he said. "Patrols at night mess with your head. You're imagining patterns." I nodded, but I didn't believe him. And I could tell he didn't fully believe me either, or maybe he was pretending not to protect me from admitting it aloud. The next incident hit closer to home. A family on the outskirts of town reported seeing the figure near their home. I arrived to investigate, flashlight cutting through the thick fog that had crept in with the night. Everything seemed normal at first. Empty yard, no footprints, no movement. Then the mother, frail, shaking, insisted she had seen someone standing just behind the trees. I questioned her gently. "What did they look like?" Her eyes glazed. She repeated my words. Not a description, not her own observations, but the exact phrases I had said to prior witnesses. Standing behind the trees, watching, waiting. I froze. She blinked, unaware of the absurdity of repeating my own words. I realized then that it didn't matter what they had seen. The witnesses themselves became shadows, hollow shells, echoes, and then, before I could intervene, they were gone. Her husband and children insisted she had never spoken of it. I checked records later. No family registered at that address. Nothing. I began to dread reporting the incidents. Not just to my superiors, but to anyone. What if I was the only one seeing these patterns? Or worse, what if acknowledging them gave the figure permission? I would drive the alleys, the streets, alone, and sometimes catch the shadow at the edge of vision. But when I approached, it was gone. The witnesses, the people who had seen it and vanished, haunted me more than the figure. Sleep became difficult. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, recalling faces that may have never existed. Faces of witnesses who disappeared or who mirrored my words or who acted mechanical, inhuman. I questioned everything. The fog in the alleys, the shadows that shifted, the presence that pressed against the edges of perception. Was it real? Was I losing my mind? Or was it something else entirely? Something patient, deliberate, and aware of my awareness. I found myself retracing steps, revisiting streets, alleys, parks where incidents occurred. But there was no pattern I could pin down, no evidence beyond memory, only fog, shadows, and the lingering sense of presence. And the vanished witnesses, half real, half imagined, existed in the space between memory and reality, waiting, silent, watching. By the end of the week, I avoided following up with residents entirely. I noted minor disturbances, yes, but I no longer sought witnesses. Too many questions, too much uncertainty. Reality itself felt malleable, bending around the pattern of disappearances and echoes. I couldn't trust memory. I couldn't trust perception. And I certainly couldn't trust the people who had once reported seeing the figure. I began leaving my patrol car at the edge of alleys, walking slowly, deliberately, flashlight cutting through the fog. I watched shadows shift. I listened for whispers in the wind. But I did not approach anyone. The presence was enough. The vanished witnesses were proof that my own senses were unreliable, that reality itself could be manipulated, or that something else was manipulating it. And still, the figure remained. Waiting, patient, aware. The vanished witnesses were not gone entirely. They were part of it, part of the memory, part of the pattern, and I could feel them in my mind when I drove home, when I walked the station halls, when I closed my eyes at night. The echo of a man's voice, the repetition of my own words through a stranger's lips, the blankness of a face that had vanished from the world. It followed me. It pressed against my thoughts, patient, deliberate. I don't know how long this will last. Each night, each patrol, I fear the witnesses more than the figure itself. They are proof that reality is fragile, that memory is unreliable, that awareness has consequences I cannot fully grasp. And when I see the figure again, I will remember the echoes, the vanished faces, and I will wonder if I, too, might fade. For now, I patrol in silence. Eyes sharp, senses strained. The figure waits. The witnesses wait. And I wait, too, caught between what is real, what is imagined, and what is something else entirely. The night had settled heavy and silent over the city, thicker than usual, as though the darkness had weight. I drove my patrol car slowly through the empty streets, fog curling along the asphalt, obscuring street lights and stretching shadows into shapes that flickered at the edges of vision. Each alley, each vacant lot, every corner I passed made my skin tighten. I wasn't just patrolling, I was feeling watched, measured. I remembered the vanished witnesses. Mrs. Carver, the jogger, the young man at the convenience store. Their faces, their voices, their echoes, it all pressed in my memory as I navigated the empty streets. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I couldn't be. Something had brushed against reality, leaving traces. And tonight, I was about to confront it directly. The call came in quietly, almost lazily. A resident had reported a shadow moving in an alley off Cedar Street. Nothing specific, just movement, a presence. I approached cautiously, engine low, spotlight sweeping. The fog was thick, hugging the corners, curling around the base of the buildings, curling in my chest as well. My heartbeat thudded in sync with the hum of the car. I parked at the mouth of the alley, flashlight in hand, and stepped out. The world outside the car was cold and heavy. The fog shifted unnaturally as I moved, seeming to thicken and thin in response to my presence. I called out, voice steady, trying to keep my fear in check. "Police, anyone here? Come out or remain where you are, I just need to check the area." Silence answered. Thick, swallowing silence. The street behind me felt miles away. The only sound was the distant hum of a lone streetlight flickering and my own breathing, sharp in my ears. I advanced slowly, flashlight sweeping the alley. Shadows pooled unnaturally against the brick walls, moving as though they were aware of me, reshaping themselves when I approached. Halfway down the alley, I saw it, the figure. Standing still at the far end, indistinct in the fog, neither moving nor breathing as far as I could tell. It was taller than average, lean, hooded, featureless from this distance. And yet I felt it. Awareness, presence, deliberate and patient. My stomach tightened, and I realized my flashlight was shaking slightly in my hand. I spoke again. "Come forward. Let's end this peacefully." The figure didn't respond. It didn't move. But I could feel it. A weight pressing into the back of my mind. An awareness brushing against the edge of thought. My chest tightened as the fog seemed to swirl around it, curling unnaturally. I took another step, then another, each footfall heavy with tension, and each step felt like it carried me into something deeper than I had known existed. Closer now. The shape remained still, featureless, yet I felt recognition, not of me exactly, but of my awareness of it. Like it knew I was seeing it, like it knew I feared it. I kept my flashlight trained, but the beam did something strange. It bent, curved slightly around the figure, illuminating the fog but leaving it in darkness. As though reality itself refused to shine on it fully. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper drifted through the alley. My ears strained, but the words were impossible to catch, fading as quickly as they came. I froze. My hands gripped the flashlight tighter. I told myself it was the wind or an echo of my own thoughts. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The fog shifted again, thickening between me and the figure, and I had the sudden, sharp impression that the world had narrowed, focused entirely on this one encounter. I stepped closer, heart hammering, and then the impossible happened. The figure moved, not fast, not suddenly, but with a fluidity that defied normal human motion. It advanced a few feet, still featureless, still hooded, yet undeniably aware of my every move. My mind screamed to retreat, to run, but my legs refused. I was rooted in place by some unspoken rule, some invisible tether I couldn't break. The whispering returned, louder now, still incomprehensible. I felt my skin crawl, hair standing on end. The fog seemed alive, curling around me, brushing against my neck, whispering something I could almost understand, something ancient and patient. My flashlight flickered, then steadied. The figure stopped. And then slowly, deliberately, it raised one hand. Not threatening, not reaching, just raised as if acknowledging me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Who? What are you?" My voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. The figure did not answer. But the fog shifted, and I felt a presence, immense, pressing, like the weight of countless vanished witnesses, the echoes of faces and voices that had existed for a moment and then vanished. They were all there in the awareness of this figure, patient and deliberate. Time seemed to stretch, elongate. Seconds became minutes. Minutes became a taut, endless tension. I couldn't look away, couldn't blink. And then the impossible, my own voice perfectly imitated, whispered from behind me, as if someone had walked in shadow. I spun, flashlight sweeping, empty, just fog, just alley. But I knew, I felt it in my chest, that the voice had come from nowhere and everywhere. The figure lowered its hand slowly, still not moving from the shadows, still featureless. The fog thickened, then thinned, curling in patterns that didn't belong to natural wind. The world felt wrong. My senses screamed at me to run, but fear was paralyzing, deeper than panic, heavier than logic. I realized then that this wasn't a simple encounter. This was a trial of perception, of reality itself. I raised my flashlight, heart thundering. You can't be real." My words sounded foolish even as I said them. And yet, the figure responded, not with movement, not with sound, but by shifting the air, bending the edges of the fog around it. It was a distortion, an awareness, something older than me, older than memory, something patient, deliberate, and aware. Then the whispering ceased. Silence fell abruptly, thick, heavy, almost deafening. The figure didn't move. It didn't vanish. And yet slowly, I felt it slip away, not physically, not disappearing, but withdrawing into the corners of perception, leaving me alone in the alley, alone with the dark, aware that the presence still lingered. I stepped back, then turned and ran to the patrol car. Fog wrapped around me as I moved, curling around my shoulders, brushing my neck. I could feel it. The lingering awareness, patient and deliberate. I slammed the door, locked it, and started the engine. The figure did not follow physically, yet I felt eyes pressing into me. Measuring, calculating, waiting, driving away. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadow between the fog and streetlights. Nothing. But the weight remained. The vanished witnesses, the echoes, the pattern of the night, all pressed in, insistent. The figure had left physically, yes, but the dread it brought, the awareness it carried, had settled into my chest, heavy and constant. I drove the streets slowly, flashlight on patrol, radio silent. Nothing moved in alleys or lots, nothing stirred in the fog, yet everywhere I looked, I felt it. Every corner, every shadow, every reflection of light seemed imbued with intent. My mind kept replaying the encounter, the impossible fluidity, the raised hand, the whispers of voices I couldn't understand but could feel. By the time I returned to the station, night was waning. The fog thinned, light creeping over rooftops, streets returning to normalcy. And yet I didn't feel relief. The figure had left, yes, but it had marked me. Awareness had weight, and I carried it now. Every shadow in the city streets felt charged, every movement deliberate, every reflection hiding impossible shapes. I stepped inside the station. Lights harsh and bright, fluorescent and harsh. But they didn't chase the memory of the alley away. I could still feel it there, patient, deliberate, aware. I knew, even without seeing it again, that it had not left entirely. The dark had acknowledged me, and I had acknowledged it. That night, alone in the city, alone with my own patrol, alone with the dark, I realized something fundamental. Fear wasn't just a reaction. Awareness was dangerous. Reality itself was malleable. And the presence, the figure, the fog, the whispers, was patient, waiting, deliberate. It didn't need to act to terrify. Its existence alone was enough. And so I sit here, remembering, writing, recounting, knowing that the dark waits still. Waiting for anyone who sees, anyone who perceives, anyone who listens. Patient, deliberate, aware. And I understand now that the routine beat. The alleys, the vanished witnesses, they were all signs. All trials, all reminders. The figure is out there, it waits. And I am never truly alone with the dark. It started like any other night. The hum of fluorescent lights, the steady clatter of keyboards, radios crackling with routine calls. I was at dispatch, headphones snug, coffee lukewarm beside me. The city slept unevenly, streets half empty, some alive with muffled engines and distant laughter, others silent, pressed beneath the weight of fog and night. The call came in quiet, almost hesitant. A voice, soft, tremulous, female, barely audible over the static. I leaned forward instinctively, adjusting the volume. "Hello? This is police dispatch?" The line crackled. Then a pause. Then faint. A crying. Not the typical sobbing or wailing. Soft, broken. Almost whispered through layers of distance, as if coming from inside a house far away, or from some place the world didn't usually acknowledge. I glanced at the screen. Caller location and address I recognized, but oddly familiar, like a place I'd seen in passing hundreds of times yet never entered. "Ma'am, can you tell me what's happening?" My voice was calm, professional, but inside my chest tightened. There was something about the tone, something about the sound of the crying that made it feel wrong. Off. Not a prank. Not a normal emergency. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew it carried weight. The line went silent. Just the soft, irregular crying, interrupted by what sounded like a pause, as though whoever was there was listening too. I heard another sound, something faint beneath the crying, rustling, a dragging perhaps. My pulse quickened. "Ma'am, are you alone?" I asked. No response. Only the crying, soft, almost hesitant. It wasn't continuous. It came in irregular bursts, each one making my stomach knot tighter. Something about the pattern was deliberate. Not natural. Not chaotic, but measured. Patient. I called the officer on the closest beat, trying to remain steady. "Unit 7, we have a call. Female caller, faint crying in background. Location is..." I recited the address. The officer acknowledged, and I felt a momentary relief. Action. Procedure. But the sound on the line didn't stop. It pressed at the edges of my awareness, insistent, drawing me in. I tried to speak again, coaxing the caller. "Ma'am, can you tell me what's happening? Are you hurt?" Silence. Not quite silence. The faint crying continued. Then, abruptly, it stopped. I waited. My knuckles whitened on the headset. A new sound came, a whisper, soft, indistinct, as if someone had leaned close to the phone. I couldn't make out the words, but I felt it. Awareness, presence, intent? I asked again, trying not to tremble. "Ma'am? Are you there?" Nothing. Only the line, open, alive with potential, and that faint sense of being watched through the wires. I tried to rationalize. Connection issues, background noise, someone playing a trick, but none of it explained the weight of attention pressing at my mind. Minutes stretched. The crying returned, uneven now, punctuated by faint echoes. Each echo seemed to contain layers, repetitions, voices that weren't entirely her own. It made me uneasy. I replayed it in my head over and over. Could it be my imagination? Fatigue? I had worked long nights before, but this felt different. Something deliberate. Something waiting. I began taking notes, carefully, trying to capture details that didn't make sense. The rhythm of the crying, the shifting tones, the way the line carried the sound like it wasn't just in the phone, but in the room with me, pressing against my ears, settling in the corners. Something about it pressed into memory differently than routine calls. I couldn't ignore it. Dispatch protocol kicked in. I kept the line open, monitoring, keeping the caller engaged, though my questions received no response. The crying shifted. From one corner of the background to another, subtle, almost imperceptible, as if moving. I imagined the caller walking, or maybe someone else. I couldn't tell. The edges of the sound felt layered, and every layer seemed intentional, deliberate. I radioed the officer again, repeating the location. "Unit 7, proceed with caution. Unusual call, faint crying. Possible distress, unknown situation. Keep eyes open for anything. Person, figure, anomaly. Proceed carefully." The officer responded quickly, voice professional, but I could hear tension in the background. Everyone knew the night had weight, but this felt different. The crying intensified suddenly, not louder exactly, but insistent, persistent. The tone shifted. It wasn't just sadness now, it was urgency. Something inside the sound clawed at me. The hairs on my neck stood up. My heartbeat thudded painfully. I felt it like a presence in the room, pressing against me. Not physically, but cognitively. Like it was aware I was listening, watching. I tried speaking calmly. "Ma'am, you're safe. Help is on the way. Just stay on the line." My voice cracked slightly. I cursed myself. Professionalism. But the sound... It reacted. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but I could feel the shift. The crying paused, then resumed. Irregular. Patterned. The sense of intent grew heavier. Time blurred. I could hear the distant radio chatter, routine calls, the hum of computers, the occasional click of keyboards. But the crying, the pressure, the line itself, it was all-consuming. My vision narrowed. My thoughts sharpened in a peculiar way, as though focusing on the sound and nothing else. The rest of the station became background noise. The world contracted to that faint crying. Then, suddenly, silence. A pause that lasted long enough to feel eternal. I held my breath, hand on the headset. Then came the whispering. Soft, multiple layers now. Not entirely human. Not coherent. I could not make out the words. I could feel meaning, however. Weight, pressure, patient awareness. Something deliberate, assessing, observing. I instinctively glanced around the room, though I was alone. No one approached. Nothing unusual in sight, and yet I could feel it. The presence, patient, deliberate, pressing into the edges of my mind. I wondered briefly if I was imagining it, if fatigue and stress had finally consumed me. But no, something was there. Something beyond comprehension. I picked up the radio again, voice unsteady. "Unit 7, status update? Any sign?" Static. Then the officer's voice, distant. "All clear, dispatch. Nothing unusual at location." My hand tightened on the headset. "Nothing unusual?" I whispered. My own voice sounded small. But it wasn't small. Not in my memory. Something unseen beyond physical space had been there. And it wasn't gone. I stayed on the line longer, listening, waiting, trying to convince myself that the world was normal, that routine continued, that nothing unseen had brushed against reality. The crying never returned, not fully, but its weight lingered. Faint echoes, like memory or shadow, pressing into my awareness. I could feel them still, faintly, long after the line went dead. Hours later, I reviewed the call logs. The number was disconnected. The address had no recent residents. Nothing in city records matched the incident. It was as though it had happened in a space adjacent to the world, touching the edges, then vanishing entirely. I remembered it vividly. The faint crying, the subtle shifts, the whispering presence, the sense that reality had bent just slightly for a moment, and that I had seen it. I couldn't shake it. Even now, sitting at the same dispatch desk, the memory presses against me. The faint crying, irregular, intentional. The weight of awareness in the background. The sense that something deliberate had reached through the wires into my mind, testing, observing, patient. And I knew, with a cold certainty, that it would happen again. I tell myself it was a one-off. A glitch in perception. Fatigue, stress. But I don't believe it. And deep down, I know I will hear that faint crying again. Somewhere, sometime, in some corner of the city. And I will feel that presence pressing against my mind once more. Patient, deliberate, aware. I keep the line open now for a moment longer, even though there's no call. I listen to the hum of the station, the faint creak of chairs, the distant radios, and in the silence, I think I hear it again, faintly, impossibly, a whisper of crying. A memory or a shadow, I don't know which. All I know is that it carries weight. And the night is patient, deliberate, aware. It started like any other night. The hum of fluorescent lights, the steady clatter of keyboards, radios crackling with routine calls. I was at dispatch, headphones snug, coffee lukewarm beside me. The city slept unevenly, streets half empty, some alive with muffled engines and distant laughter, others silent, pressed beneath the weight of fog and night. The call came in quiet, almost hesitant. A voice, soft, tremulous, female, barely audible over the static. I leaned forward instinctively, adjusting the volume. "Hello, this is police dispatch?" The line crackled. Then a pause. Then faint. A crying. Not the typical sobbing or wailing. Soft, broken, almost whispered through layers of distance, as if coming from inside a house far away, or from someplace the world didn't usually acknowledge. I glanced at the screen. Caller location. An address I recognized, but oddly familiar, like a place I'd seen in passing hundreds of times yet never entered. "Ma'am, can you tell me what's happening?" My voice was calm, professional, but inside my chest tightened. There was something about the tone, something about the sound of the crying, that made it feel wrong, off. Not a prank, not a normal emergency. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew it carried weight. The line went silent. Just the soft, irregular crying, interrupted by what sounded like a pause, as though whoever was there was listening too. I heard another sound, something faint beneath the crying, rustling, a dragging, perhaps. My pulse quickened. "Ma'am, are you alone?" I asked. No response. Only the crying, soft, almost hesitant. It wasn't continuous. It came in irregular bursts, each one making my stomach knot tighter. Something about the pattern was deliberate. Not natural. Not chaotic, but measured. Patient. I called the officer on the closest beat, trying to remain steady. "Unit 7, we have a call." Female caller, faint crying in background. "Location is..." I recited the address. The officer acknowledged, and I felt a momentary relief. Action, procedure. But the sound on the line didn't stop. It pressed at the edges of my awareness, insistent, drawing me in. I tried to speak again, coaxing the caller. "Ma'am, can you tell me what's happening? Are you hurt?" Silence. Not quite silence. The faint crying continued. Then abruptly it stopped. I waited. My knuckles whitened on the headset. A new sound came. A whisper. Soft. Indistinct. As if someone had leaned close to the phone. I couldn't make out the words. But I felt it. Awareness. Presence. Intent. I asked again, trying not to tremble. "Ma'am, are you there?" Nothing. Only the line. Open. Alive with potential. And that faint sense of being watched through the wires. I tried to rationalize. Connection issues. Background noise. Someone playing a trick. But none of it explained the weight of attention pressing at my mind. Minutes stretched. The crying returned, uneven now, punctuated by faint echoes. Each echo seemed to contain layers, repetitions, voices that weren't entirely her own. It made me uneasy. I replayed it in my head over and over. Could it be my imagination? Fatigue? I had worked long nights before, but this felt different. Something deliberate. Something waiting. I began taking notes carefully, trying to capture details that didn't make sense. The rhythm of the crying, the shifting tones, the way the line carried the sound like it wasn't just in the phone, but in the room with me, pressing against my ears, settling in the corners. Something about it pressed into memory differently than routine calls. I couldn't ignore it. Dispatch protocol kicked in. I kept the line open, monitoring, keeping the caller engaged, though my questions received no response. The crying shifted, from one corner of the background to another, subtle, almost imperceptible, as if moving. I imagined the caller walking, or maybe someone else. I couldn't tell. The edges of the sound felt layered, and every layer seemed intentional, deliberate. I radioed the officer again, repeating the location. "Unit 7, proceed with caution. Unusual call, faint crying. Possible distress, unknown situation. Keep eyes open for anything, person, figure, anomaly. Proceed carefully." The officer responded quickly, voice professional, but I could hear tension in the background. Everyone knew the night had weight, but this felt different. The crying intensified suddenly, not louder exactly, but insistent, persistent. The tone shifted. It wasn't just sadness now, it was urgency. Something inside the sound clawed at me. The hairs on my neck stood up. My heartbeat thudded painfully. I felt it like a presence in the room, pressing against me. Not physically, but cognitively. Like it was aware I was listening, watching. I tried speaking calmly. "Ma'am, you're safe. Help is on the way. Just stay on the line." My voice cracked slightly. I cursed myself. Professionalism. But the sound, it reacted. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but I could feel the shift. The crying paused, then resumed, irregular, patterned. The sense of intent grew heavier, time blurred. I could hear the distant radio chatter, routine calls, the hum of computers, the occasional click of keyboards. But the crying, the pressure, the line itself, it was all-consuming. My vision narrowed. My thoughts sharpened in a peculiar way, as though focusing on the sound and nothing else. The rest of the station became background noise. The world contracted to that faint crying. Then, suddenly, silence. A pause that lasted long enough to feel eternal. I held my breath, hand on the headset. Then came the whispering. Soft, multiple layers now. Not entirely human, not coherent. I could not make out the words. I could feel meaning, however. Weight, pressure, patient awareness. Something deliberate, assessing, observing. I instinctively glanced around the room, though I was alone. No one approached. Nothing unusual in sight, and yet I could feel it. The presence, patient, deliberate, pressing into the edges of my mind. I wondered briefly if I was imagining it, if fatigue and stress had finally consumed me. But no, something was there. Something beyond comprehension. I picked up the radio again, voice unsteady. Unit 7, status update. Any sign? Static. Then the officer's voice, distant. All clear, dispatch. Nothing unusual at location. My hand tightened on the headset. Nothing unusual? I whispered. My own voice sounded small, but it wasn't small. Not in my memory. Something unseen beyond physical space had been there, and it wasn't gone. I stayed on the line longer, listening, waiting, trying to convince myself that the world was normal, that routine continued, that nothing unseen had brushed against reality. The crying never returned, not fully, but its weight lingered. Faint echoes, like memory or shadow, pressing into my awareness. I could feel them still, faintly, long after the line went dead. Hours later, I reviewed the call logs. The number was disconnected. The address had no recent residents. Nothing in city records matched the incident. It was as though it had happened in a space adjacent to the world, touching the edges, then vanishing entirely. I remembered it vividly. The faint crying, the subtle shifts, the whispering presence, the sense that reality had bent just slightly for a moment and that I had seen it. I couldn't shake it. Even now, sitting at the same dispatch desk, the memory presses against me. The faint crying, irregular, intentional. The weight of awareness in the background. The sense that something deliberate had reached through the wires. Into my mind, testing, observing, patient. And I knew with a cold certainty that it would happen again. I tell myself it was a one-off, a glitch in perception, fatigue, stress. But I don't believe it. And deep down, I know I will hear that faint crying again. Somewhere, sometime, in some corner of the city. And I will feel that presence pressing against my mind once more. Patient, deliberate, aware. I keep the line open now for a moment longer, even though there's no call. I listen to the hum of the station, the faint creak of chairs, the distant radios. And in the silence, I think I hear it again. Faintly, impossibly, a whisper of crying. A memory or a shadow. I don't know which. All I know is that it carries weight, and the night is patient, deliberate, aware. The night after the final call, I felt uneasy before even stepping into the station. The memory of the crying lingered heavy in my chest, pressing at the edges of thought. Even the fluorescent lights seemed harsher, colder, as if they were aware of what had happened and disapproved. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a routine night ahead. More paperwork, more calls, nothing unusual. But the city didn't listen to rationalizations. The first sign came over the radio. Static. Not the usual crackle, but a soft, insistent hum layered beneath the normal channel noise. I froze, hand hovering over the dial. My colleagues were scattered in the station, answering routine calls, tracking patrols, typing reports. At first, no one noticed. I thought maybe my headset was glitching, a loose connection. But then came the whispering. Soft, indecipherable, almost beneath the threshold of hearing. I strained to catch it. It wasn't a voice from any channel I knew, not a misdirected transmission. It carried something deliberate, an awareness. It came in fragments, trailing under the static like a hidden layer in the air itself. My pulse quickened. I felt a cold prickle along my neck. I leaned closer to the headset, voice low. "Is anyone else hearing that?" My words were half question, half command. A few colleagues glanced up, frowning at me. "What?" "It's just static," one said, brushing it off. Another nodded absently. But a third froze, staring at their radio, pale. I heard it too," they whispered, voice trembling. That was the moment I knew. I wasn't imagining it. We tried to test it, changing channels, cycling frequencies, even moving radios around the station. The static and whispering shifted with us, following the devices. Every time someone spoke, it responded, not in words, but in patterns. Subtle. A soft swell when we asked questions. A faint pause when silence fell, like it was listening, understanding. The shadows came next, always at the periphery. Dark shapes along walls, corners where no lights reached. Movement so slight it could be dismissed as a trick of the eye, but unmistakable when noticed. Fleeting glimpses, just enough to catch the mind off guard. One of the newer dispatchers swore someone walked behind her desk, even though she was alone. She was pale, eyes wide, hands trembling. We laughed it off nervously, trying to convince ourselves it was fatigue. But the unease lingered, pooling in the air like smoke. By midnight, the whispers had grown more pronounced. Not louder exactly, but insistent. Layered. Sometimes multiple tones, like overlapping voices, faint, incomprehensible, almost forming words. I caught fragments now and then, syllables I didn't recognize, sounds that made the hair on my arms bristle. I stopped trying to interpret them. There was no language here, only intent. I checked the cameras in the station. Nothing unusual. Empty hallways, no one sneaking around, and yet the sense of being observed pressed against me, heavy and insistent. It followed me as I walked from console to console, radios in hand, trying to track patterns. Every time I paused, the whispering would swell, subtle and deliberate, as though urging me to stay, to listen, to acknowledge. Colleagues began reporting small anomalies. Phones ringing when no one had dialed. Files on desks shifting slightly. Shadows moving behind frosted glass just beyond clear sight. The station, normally sterile and predictable, felt alive with something patient, deliberate and unexplainable. I could feel it pressing against our minds, testing, probing, waiting for reactions. I spent hours trying to document it, noting when the static intensified, when whispers grew layered, when shadows appeared. Every pattern was deliberate, almost intelligent. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't random. Something was here, interacting with us subtly, shaping the environment. I caught myself glancing at corners, expecting to see shapes waiting, silhouettes frozen, and each time my pulse spiked. At one point, I walked to the break room for coffee, trying to distract myself. The whispers followed, soft, insistent, curling around the hum of the coffee machine. I froze, coffee in hand, and realized that even in isolation, it persisted. Not in physical form, but in presence, awareness. The station itself seemed conscious, responding to our movements. I returned to the main console. A colleague, pale and trembling, whispered, "It's in the air tonight." "It's watching," I nodded without words. I could feel it too. Layered attention, like 1,000 eyes brushing against the edges of perception. It was patient, deliberate, waiting, and not bound by physical space. The worst moment came when we tried to make sense of the phenomena. We grouped, shared observations, and that was when the whispering changed. Subtle at first, echoing the tones of our voices, mimicking phrases we'd just spoken almost mockingly. Then a pattern emerged. It repeated fragments of our words, slightly distorted, sometimes rearranged. It wasn't just interference. It was responsive, interactive, intelligent. I realized then that we weren't dealing with a glitch or even a spirit in the conventional sense. This was something different. Something patient, deliberate, aware, probing the edges of reality. It wasn't malevolent, not yet, but it was testing, exploring. The shadows, the static, the whispers, all tools for observation. Fatigue set in, but no one left their post. There was a strange compulsion, almost hypnotic. We stayed, watching, listening, documenting. Any attempt to disengage was met with a swelling of presence, a subtle tightening of awareness, like the air itself was responding to our intentions. I caught myself staring at the main hallway camera feed for hours. Shadows stretched unnaturally across walls, angles bent subtly. Corners where the camera couldn't reach seemed darker, heavier. A colleague whispered, "I think it follows us even on tape." And I didn't disagree. How could it not? The static, the whispering, the shapes, they were everywhere and nowhere. By 3 a.m., exhaustion and fear had settled in our bones. The station was silent now, all calls quiet, the city itself seeming to hold its breath. And yet the presence lingered, patient and deliberate. I realized then something chilling. We weren't witnessing random phenomena. We were being observed, tested, cataloged. Every small movement, every breath, every heartbeat noted in a system we could not perceive. A junior dispatcher muttered from her console, voice trembling, "It's like it's alive, inside us." I wanted to dismiss her fear, but deep down, I knew she was right. Presence is more than a thing. It's awareness. And tonight, awareness had weight. Presence had intent. The static, the whispers, the shadows, they were just tools. The intelligence behind it waited for engagement. By the end of the shift, we were pale, trembling, exhausted, and deeply unsettled. The whispers didn't stop when we powered down radios, didn't vanish with the lights. The shadows remained at the edges of vision. I left the station feeling the presence cling to me, like a shadow pressed into the bones of my consciousness. I couldn't shake it. In bed later, the memory of static and whispers played behind my closed eyes, layering over dreams. Shapes shifted in the dark corners of my room. Shadows stretched impossibly long. The sound of faint whispers hovered just beneath hearing. I realized then, fully and with undeniable certainty, that what had visited us at the station had not left. It never would. And now, whenever the radio hums, whenever static scratches across the frequencies, I flinch. I know the presence waits, patient, deliberate, aware, testing, watching, observing the world in silence, behind channels, behind shadow, in spaces we cannot touch. And I cannot forget it, not even for a moment, not in sleep, not in wakefulness, because it follows unseen but known. I have begun to notice it in small ways. Shadows at the corner of streets, echoes of voices not present, faint interference in electronics. The memory of the station, the whispers, the static, they are a baseline now. They have taught me to notice, to feel, to understand that the world is layered, and we are not alone in its quiet moments. The colleagues who experienced it too. Some laugh nervously, some ignore it, some refuse to speak of it. I understand why. Naming it gives it shape, acknowledges it. But acknowledgement also invites attention. We are careful now, wary, and yet it is always there, patient, deliberate, aware, watching, waiting. Every day since, I have carried that night with me. The station may have returned to routine. The city may sleep uneasily, but I am changed. I see the static in air, the whispers in quiet moments, the shadows stretching at impossible angles. And I know deeply that whatever it is, whatever watches and waits, it is patient, deliberate, aware, and it remembers. The night had been quiet at first, deceptively quiet, like the world was holding its breath, waiting. I had finished a routine check along the northern beats, the streets dimly lit, almost empty. It was the kind of night that makes your senses sharpen. Every footstep, every hum of an engine, every whisper of wind carries weight. My partner for the shift, Officer Daniels, radioed in as usual, voice steady, professional. But there was something off. A hesitation, a slight tremor in his tone. I didn't register it at first. I thought maybe fatigue. By the time I reached the junction near Oak Ridge Lane, Daniels had stopped responding to routine check-ins. Not immediately, just small delays. At first, I assumed poor reception, static interference. But the delays grew longer, the gaps unnatural, like someone pressing pause on the world. I radioed him directly. "Daniels, you copy?" The line was crackling, faint, and then nothing. Silence that stretched too long. I stopped the cruiser, heartbeat thudding. My mind raced. He wouldn't just ignore a check-in. Not Daniels. Something was wrong. I called dispatch. Unit 12, status check on Unit 11? The dispatcher's voice was calm, procedural. Unit 11 hasn't checked in for the last 5 minutes. Please investigate. I drove slowly, scanning the streets, headlights cutting through fog that had begun to roll in, thick and wet, clinging to every surface. Streetlights barely pierced the gray. The quiet made every sound exaggerated. Tires on wet asphalt. The faint scuff of my boots as I stepped out, the distant hum of the city, muted. I reached the last location Daniels had reported, the intersection near the old Oak Ridge Park. Nothing. No cruiser. No sign of him. Just the fog curling around street signs and the skeletal branches of trees. The shadows dancing in the corners of my vision. My stomach clenched. I stepped out of the car, flashlight in hand, sweeping the fog. The beam caught nothing but mist and darkness. No footprints, no tire marks beyond the obvious wet tracks of my own vehicle. I called again, voice steadier than I felt. Daniels, come in. Unit 12 here. Status. Silence. Only static. I shivered. Something about the sound of the static made my teeth ache, like a low, persistent vibration against my skull. I glanced around. Shadows shifted. I swear I saw movement at the edge of the fog, a figure or maybe a trick of the light. My breath caught in my throat. I started walking toward the park entrance, flashlight sweeping side to side. The park was abandoned, swings swaying slightly despite the still air, the slide gleaming wet under the dim light. Every instinct screamed at me that something was wrong, that I was being watched, studied. The hairs on my arms stood up. I slowed, listening. No sounds of wildlife, no cars. Nothing except the faint scuff of something moving just beyond the beam. I called dispatch again, trying to keep my voice normal. Unit 12 to dispatch. Officer Daniels missing. Last known location, Oak Ridge intersection. Requesting immediate backup. The dispatcher acknowledged and told me units were on the way. But the silence around me was oppressive, heavier than fog or night air could account for. I stepped further into the park. The swings moved again, slow, unnatural. One beam of my flashlight caught something on the ground. A dropped glove, a radio. My stomach lurched. I bent down, heart hammering. It was nothing, just a wet, broken branch. But the feeling of dread didn't leave. It settled into my chest, cold and insistent. Then I heard it. Faint at first, almost beneath hearing. A voice, a laugh. Not human, not entirely. I froze. My flashlight flicked across the trees, trying to catch movement. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles now, pressing at me, soft but persistent. The air itself felt alive, as though it were aware of me. I radioed again. Daniels, respond. Unit 12, respond. Nothing. The static was louder now, sharper, more insistent. And then a whisper. Faint, almost teasing, curling through the air, drifting between trees. I could not place the direction. It seemed everywhere and nowhere. My skin crawled. My pulse thrummed in my ears. I started walking cautiously, following the direction of the whispers, though I had no reason to believe they led to him. It was instinct, driven by the need to find my partner, to do something, anything. Every step felt heavier, as though the fog itself resisted me. Shadows moved in the corner of my vision, shapes that seemed to stretch, bend unnaturally. I would spin the flashlight and the shape would vanish, leaving only empty space, nothing but fog and dark. Minutes stretched. My mind raced. What could have happened? A misstep? A fall? Or something else? Something unseen? Every horror I had imagined in training flashed through my mind. And yet, something about the air around me told me none of it fit. This was something older, patient, aware, not random, not accidental. I reached the center of the park. The swings stopped moving. The air was eerily still. Then I noticed footprints, wet, deep, dragging slightly, leading into the forest beyond the park. I shone my flashlight along them. They weren't entirely human. Longer, too uniform. No hesitation. And they led nowhere I could see, just vanished into the fog. I felt a shift in the air, subtle but undeniable. A pressure, like a presence beside me. I spun the flashlight, catching nothing. But the feeling remained, brushing against the edge of perception, pressing into the back of my mind. My throat went dry. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run, but I couldn't, not yet. Not until I found him. I radioed again, voice unsteady. Unit 12 to dispatch. Tracing footprints into forest. Need immediate backup. Possible abduction. Static answered me. Nothing else. The whispering returned, faint melodic teasing. It sounded like voices I could almost recognize, overlapping in tones, stretching words into something unintelligible. My stomach churned. The fog thickened, curling around my legs now like living tendrils. I moved forward slowly, each step careful, every sense straining. The forest swallowed light and sound. Shapes moved just beyond the beam of my flashlight. Shadows twisted in impossible angles. My heart pounded in my ears. And then a faint cry. Daniels, or something else imitating him? I couldn't tell. It was a sound distorted, elongated, echoing unnaturally. I called out his name. My voice cracked. Daniels! Respond! Silence. And then the fog shifted. Shadows converged, subtle, layered, almost tangible. My flashlight flickered. The air felt dense, thick with anticipation. And then, in the brief flicker of light, I thought I saw him, or something that looked like him, standing in the distance, half-formed, indistinct. Before I could move, he, or it, vanished. Just gone. I froze. Panic gripped me, raw and immediate. The forest was quiet again, too quiet. The static in my radio swelled, whispers overlaying it, unintelligible but insistent. Every instinct screamed that I was being watched, that I had stepped into something patient and deliberate. Something that had taken Daniels, or maybe was waiting for me. Backup arrived moments later, though the time felt longer than it was. The officers followed my instructions, flashlights cutting into fog and shadow. We searched systematically, calling Daniel's name. The fog resisted. Shadows danced at the edge of vision. No signs of him. No tracks beyond those initial footprints. Nothing. Just emptiness. Dense, oppressive, aware. I was shaken, trembling, heart still racing. Dispatch was alive with calls, asking what had happened, trying to gather details. I recounted as best I could. The static, the whispers, the dragging footprints, the vanishing figure. My colleagues listened, skeptical at first, then silent, uneasy. They had felt it too. The oppressive awareness, the patient, deliberate presence that seemed to follow us even in daylight afterward. We documented the area, retraced paths, but it was gone. Daniels was gone. And I knew in that deep, unshakable way that he hadn't wandered off. Whatever had claimed him was patient, deliberate, aware, waiting. And it was not finished. The rest of the night was a haze. We combed streets, retraced beats, monitored calls, but nothing else happened. Only the memory of him disappearing into the fog. The feeling of unseen eyes pressing against my mind, and the whispering presence that seemed to linger, patient, deliberate, aware. When I finally returned to the station, hours later, the weight didn't lift. Shadows at the corners of the room seemed sharper, angles darker. Radios buzzed faintly even when off, and I knew with certainty that whatever had taken Daniels had not left. Not entirely. Not ever. Even now, when the fog rolls in thick over the northern streets, I remember the dragging footprints, the whispering static, the vanishing figure. And I feel it again. Patient, deliberate, aware, always just beyond reach, watching, waiting. I don't know if Daniels is gone forever. I don't know if we'll ever see him again, but I know what waits in the fog, patient and aware. And I know that it's watching. And I know that night, the night he disappeared, was only the beginning. I don't remember ever feeling silence like that. Not the quiet of a room or the hush of night on a deserted street. No, this was the kind of silence that presses in from every angle, heavy, oppressive, deliberate. It followed us after Daniels disappeared, after the fog swallowed him, after the whispers of the forest bent around our panic, after every desperate call for him dissolved into nothing. The silence came first, and then the unease settled into my bones. The investigation began in earnest the next day. Supervisors, detectives, and backup units combed the northern beats, Oak Ridge Park, and surrounding areas. I accompanied them, retracing my steps, pointing out the places where I had seen footprints drag into the mist, where shadows had flickered just beyond the flashlight's reach. But the closer we looked, the more frustrating it became. There was nothing. Nothing at all. No tire tracks beyond my own, no footprints, no trace of Daniels, not even his radio. It was as if he had been lifted from the world entirely, leaving only the fog and the shadows in his place. I remember standing at the edge of the park, flashlight idle in my hand and thinking I could feel the ground shift beneath my feet. Not physically, but in awareness. Like the earth itself had been watching, waiting, observing, and now it resented intrusion. Every branch, every twisted root seemed to twitch with hidden life. My colleagues joked nervously, tried to make light of the situation, but their eyes flicked toward the trees every time the wind shifted. None of us admitted it aloud, but we all felt it. The patient, deliberate presence, aware of our investigation, aware of us. We spent hours scanning the forest line. Drones, cameras, search teams with thermal imaging, everything yielded nothing. The forest was dense, but not that dense. Not enough to completely hide a human being. And yet every search ended the same, empty. Not missing in the conventional sense. Not run off or hidden. Removed, erased. I began to question what we were really looking for. Back at the station, the atmosphere had changed. The phones and radios were fine during the day, but at night, that same interference returned. Static crawling beneath every channel, whispers that seemed just beyond comprehension. Sometimes I thought I heard Daniel's voice among them, distorted, faint, pleading. But the more I listened, the more I questioned my own senses. Was it him? Or was it just the presence, teasing us, taunting us, bending our minds in subtle ways? I started keeping notes obsessively. Times, locations, what I had felt, what I had seen, even the faintest shifts in shadow. I recorded each instance of whispering, each flicker of movement at the periphery of my vision. The documentation felt necessary, a way to anchor reality when it seemed to waver around me. Because after Daniels disappeared, the world itself seemed less certain. Edges weren't sharp. Light didn't behave the way it should. And the presence, whatever it was, had grown bolder, brushing against our perception more insistently. I spoke to the detectives assigned to the case. They asked me questions, took statements, tried to make sense of my accounts. I could see the doubt in their eyes, the rational explanations forming just beneath the surface. Stress, exhaustion, misperception, imagination. I wanted to argue, to insist that what I had experienced was real, that the fog, the shadows, the whispers were not in my mind alone. But every time I tried, the memory of that night's silence returned. Thick and suffocating, reminding me that words were fragile, inadequate. One officer suggested that Daniels might have wandered into the river, that perhaps he had fallen somewhere unseen. I thought about it and couldn't reconcile it. Not with what I had seen, not with the footprints, the dragging, the way the fog had shifted around him, almost conscious, almost protective. This was something beyond explanation, something that obeyed its own rules. And as much as I tried to push the thought away, the sense of being watched remained. Patient, deliberate, aware. At night, the station became unbearable. Even in full light, I could feel the pressure. Shadows lingered just beyond vision, stretching unnaturally, twisting against the edges of walls. The static would return, faint, insistent, and sometimes, just sometimes, I swore I heard footsteps behind me. Not echoes, not coincidences. Steps pacing mine, stopping when I stopped. My hands shook, my heart hammered, and yet when I turned, there was nothing. Only empty corridors and my own reflection in the windows. Sleep was a poor refuge. Dreams blurred into reality, folding over the events of that night. I dreamt of fog curling around Daniels, of shadows stretching impossibly long to envelop him. I would wake in a sweat, gasping, and feel the same presence in my bedroom, brushing at the edges of my awareness. Sometimes I could hear faint whispers, though the house was empty. Sometimes I thought I saw shapes in the corners of my room, stretching, bending, patient, and deliberate. I began noticing small changes in reality. Objects slightly out of place, shadows that didn't align with their source, faint distortions in reflective surfaces. At first I blamed fatigue, stress, grief. But slowly, inexorably, I realized it wasn't just my perception. Something else was at work. Something that had followed us from the park, from the fog, from the night Daniels disappeared. And it was deliberate, patient, aware. Colleagues spoke less of the incident, avoided the subject, pretended life had returned to normal. But the station itself refused normalcy. The hum of fluorescent lights felt wrong. Static lingered faintly in the phones, in the radios, in moments of quiet. Shadows curled differently, angles felt sharper. And every time the fog rolled in outside, I felt it more acutely, alive, conscious, waiting, watching, testing. I remember standing on the balcony of the station one morning, looking over Oak Ridge Lane. The fog had settled again, thick and silent, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw a figure at the edge of the trees, motionless. Human? Not human? I could not tell. I blinked, and it was gone. But the impression remained, patient, deliberate, aware, watching me as I watched the empty forest. Investigators eventually closed the case officially, labeling Daniels' disappearance as undetermined. No evidence, no trace, no explanation. But closure did not come. The station felt heavier, darker. The fog clung differently. The shadows lingered longer. And I cannot stop noticing. Every faint noise, every flicker of light, every whispering static in the radios brings me back to that night. The night that taught me that something unseen can be aware, patient, deliberate, and infinitely persistent. I can't explain it. Rational thought fails. Training fails. Experience fails. All I can do is notice, to feel, to document, and to remain vigilant. Because it waits. Whatever it is, it waits. And the memory of Daniels, the feeling of him being taken, erased, reminds me that patience is a weapon, and awareness can be terrifying beyond comprehension. Sometimes I hear a faint echo of his voice in the distance. I know it isn't him. It's not human, but it carries the cadence, the rhythm, the memory of him. A cruel imitation, a reminder. And I feel the pressure again, patient, deliberate, aware, brushing at my mind, waiting for attention, for acknowledgement, for interaction. The fog, the shadows, the whispers, the static. They have become part of my life now. Part of my perception, part of my memory, part of my sleep. I see patterns where others see nothing. I hear voices where others hear only wind. I feel presence where others feel emptiness. And I have begun to accept that this is the new reality. Not just for me, but for anyone who strays too close, who notices too much. I don't know if Daniels is still out there, or if he exists anywhere at all. I don't know if what we encountered will ever be fully understood. And I don't know if the whispers will ever stop, or if the shadows will ever recede. All I know is that the silence after him, the stillness after that night, carries a weight, a memory, a presence that cannot be ignored. And so I remain alert, vigilant, listening for whispers in the static, watching shadows stretch at impossible angles, feeling the patience of something aware. It is always there, always patient, always deliberate. I cannot see it, cannot touch it, cannot confront it, but I can feel it. And that is enough. Enough to know that the silence after is not empty, not ever. It is alive, aware, and it remembers.